We are pain, that's all. We are God.
Hey guys! I'm back and I bring to you the part 13 and also the latest part and chapters of What If Naruto Gained Unwanted Immortality. The fourth Shinobi War has ended with the sealing of Kaguya and the Juubi in Naruto. As the years pass and his unwanted immortality becomes clear, what will Naruto do when everyone he once fought for returns to dust as the world about him changes? Don't forget to hit like and subscribe and check the author in the description. Let's start. Chapter 67. The day before battle. Swish, 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 crack, ow. Sounds of training and the occasional yelps of pain echoed through the forest in Naruto's Kamui as his clones ruthlessly trained his new student into the ground. Leaning in the shade against one of the many mokutan trees, Arya observed in silent amusement as Siri desperately dodged a constant barrage of blunted kunai on all sides by her lover's clones. Now that it's not me getting kunai thrown at, I can see why Naruto loves training others. Arya uncharacteristically smirked as a dull kunai narrowly brushed past Siri's forehead, not realizing how corrupted her thoughts had become. But before she could continue watching the show, a certain blonde's grinning whiskered face abruptly popped up in front of her. Boo! Not even bothering to twitch at his sudden upside-down appearance, as she was wont to do, Arya merely smiled back before leaning in for a quick kiss. Boo, Naruto. Pulling back, she chuckled when she saw Naruto pout in dissatisfaction at the short kiss, his eyes all scrunched up into tiny slits. But when she tried to casually flick a finger at his forehead for attempting to scare her, he instinctively tilted his head to the side to avoid the potentially deadly digit. Blinking owlishly, Arya felt her temple faintly twitch as she stared at Naruto, who had shifted his gaze to a patch of bushes while innocently whistling. That didn't stop him from weaving his head like a bobblehead around the flurry of finger flicks she suddenly sent his way, their motions but a blur as they casually defied the laws of physics in their little game of cat and mouse. By then, Siri had noticed the not-so-subtle commotion her elders were making. Her eyes still sometimes twinged, definitely not because of the several close calls with certain instruments of death when she remembered the time when she asked the two their ages, only to discover that they were even older than her parents who were already almost a century old. The fact the object of her affection, yes, she knew it was wrong to crush on a man who loved another, was old enough to be her grandfather just made her already murky feelings toward her teacher all the more confusing. Personally, she blamed it on suddenly having so much time on her hands, without the need to constantly look over her shoulder. Not that she was complaining, of course. Had she continued to have been chaste, not that she was complaining, of course, she probably never would have found herself falling for the endearing blonde. Although Siri by nature was headstrong and willful when it came to love and relationships, even she knew it was wrong to have such feelings towards Naruto, especially when he already belonged to another. Yet despite all that, she still couldn't get rid of the blonde from her mind. Perhaps I should give up on this foolish, damn it. Dodging another kunai by a hair's breadth. Any thoughts about the real Naruto momentarily evaporated as Siri's sweat dropped and it drilled into the ground before disappearing entirely. Hey! Are you trying to kill me? What if I hadn't dodged that? Irately yelling at her merciless instructor's clones, she tilted her head to the side just in time for one of the blunt kunai to pulverize one of her stray strands of snowy hair into dust. Inspecting the split end, Siri irritably glared towards one of Naruto's clones, who merely stuck its tongue out at her. Don't worry, Lil White. Even if you're on the edge of death, the boss will fix you right up, like the last 100 times. Now dodge. The clone wickedly cackled when 4 more kunai appeared in each of its hands, his fellow clones mirroring its actions as they too prepared to start another round, their brilliant grins almost blinding their victim. Are you serious? And don't call me that, my hair is ashen or gray, thank you very much. Siri loudly protested against her misnomer of a nickname as she subconsciously ducked under the projectiles aimed at her back, all the while thinking about what she learned of her somewhat sadistic sensei in the past month and his contradictory nature. It didn't take very long after she arrived to come to the conclusion that despite the harsh and even brutal training Naruto imposed on her, the man was a big softy inside. Outside of their grueling sessions, Siri never found anything to complain about her host. He never tried to restrict her freedom in or outside of the Kamui or pry into her history, and yet another reason. Rather, he was content with their occasional talks about her home and fantastic journey, although, said journey mostly consisted of her fleeing through numerous worlds without having the time to peruse them at her leisure. And unlike what most have done upon discovering her extraordinary abilities, Naruto didn't try to exploit her power for his own agenda. Then again, after seeing what he could do over the past weeks, it's understandable that he merely had a passing curiosity of my powers. Instead, he was far more interested about the monsters of my world. Siri Wrly thought as more knives flew at her. She did find it rather amusing however at how quickly Naruto paled when she mentioned ghosts and specters and his insistent claims that he feared no such thing. To think someone like him would be afraid of such a thing, it made him seem more human with such an odd fear. With this, if she hadn't known that he had just destroyed an entire city and its residents the night he found her, Siri would never have suspected him capable of harming a fly, which greatly helped her quickly get over her initial fear of the blonde and his impossible powers. It didn't seem possible for someone who loved life as he did and was capable of such a bright, infectious, and pure smile to be remotely capable of killing anyone. So when Siri first saw Naruto's uncharacteristically nonchalant manner towards the terrible war against the most powerful and insane king in the history of Alexia and the fate of her people, it confused her. She couldn't begin to make sense of his conflicting actions. How could such a person ignore all of the death happening around him and still be capable of smiling after massacring 100,000 innocent civilians? She even wondered if she had somehow read Naruto wrongly all this time, while rare, wouldn't be the first time she did. But, as Siri leapt away from several kunai that would have at least cracked her bones, the young lass's bright eyes slightly glazed over as her mind wandered to the memory of that night a few days ago. Flashback. 3 weeks had passed since Alexia received its first extra-dimensional guest, the powerful and elusive Lady of Space and Time, who was currently dead to the world in the middle of a clearing from a combination of exhaustion and a blow to the head from a certain elf. Several hours had passed since Naruto and Arya moved away from the moonlit glade, leaving Siri spread-eagled on the soft grass. Had nothing happened, she likely would have stayed unconscious if it weren't for the presence of a playful gust of wind tickling her nose. Sneezing, her eyes fluttered open. Ow, my head. Lifting her calloused hand to clutch the growing lump on her otherwise flawless forehead, Siri weakly moaned out, only to hiss out in intense pain when she accidentally applied too much pressure against the dark purple bump. It took a few seconds of flopping about like a dying fish before the piercing agony faded to a more manageable dull ache. Neither of those two show any mercy, do they? Siri grumbled at Naruto's lack of tact against the fairer gender as she laid on her back while staring at the twinkling stars. Not for the first time, she wondered exactly how large her teacher's Kamui dimension. Even now, after spending almost a month in his pocket dimension, she still wondered just how large this place was, especially when it contained its own full sun-moon cycle, thousands of stars, as well as a seemingly endless amount of land. There were even animals and insects present all around her. It was as if there was an entire universe hidden behind those strange eyes of his. With just the gentle breeze as her companion, several quiet minutes passed by before Siri abruptly sighed, unable to return to the land of dreams despite it being late and having rested for several hours, if being knocked out could be considered as resting. Rolling over onto her toned belly, the battered foreigner unsteadily began to lift herself off the ground, all the while grumbling out quiet curses and promises of retribution toward the immortal pair. Of course she didn't really mean any of them. Didn't stop her from doing so anyways. Once she was back on her feet, Siri blinked away the stars behind her eyelids before beginning to aimlessly wander about the forest without any particular destination in mind. Might as well train this damn bloodline of mine if I can't sleep. Relying on the light from the luminescent moon and stars, she made her way to the edge of the woods, her once wobbly steps growing stronger by the minute. Finally reaching batting away the last branch obstructing her path to her target, Siri briefly paused, slowly inhaling and then exhaling before reaching into the space within her that contained a power familiar, yet as wild and uncontrollable as the sea herself, and grabbing as much of it as she could. And then in a flash of ghostly green, she disappeared, only to reappear a handful of feet away from her starting position. Glancing back, Siri clucked her tongue in slight disapproval at her unsuccessful attempt. TCH, so even that's not enough. Steeling herself, she continued to hop towards the tree. After almost 100 jumps, Siri finally arrived several yards from her target, its leaves faintly rustling in the wind, before falling to her knees while gasping for air as small beads of sweat dripped and soaked into the ground. Had it been anywhere else, even back outside in Allegezia, such a feat would have not even consumed half the energy it did here, if even that. Nevertheless. Well, at least I'm finally able to teleport in here. Siri muttered as she climbed back onto her feet, an action she had become quite familiar with in the past several weeks. But just as she was preparing herself for the last blink that would carry her to the towering oak, she paused as her attention was drawn to something that didn't quite belong up in her tree. Narrowing her eyes, she soon spotted the tips of a very familiar blonde spiky hair poking amongst the whispering leaves as they swayed in the wind. It wasn't difficult to determine the identity of the one sitting in the tree. If I'm not mistaken, that's definitely Naruto, the real one. But what's he doing here? Shouldn't he be asleep by now? Siri dared not even move another inch closer in fear of alerting her seemingly omniscient teacher. Instead she craned her neck in an attempt to peer past the barrier of leaves and branches, and as she did, managing to catch a glimpse of him facing the moon while leaning against the trunk nearly 6 feet above her on one of its thickest branches, a flask of what she assumed to be some form of alcoholic drink loosely held in his hand. At first glance, nothing appeared out of the ordinary, yet something about the current Naruto bothered her. Something's different. Several seconds passed as Siri waited in silence before she realized something odd. By now, Naruto should have noticed her even if he wasn't paying attention to his surroundings. In fact, he should have noticed the instant she began to loudly make her way through the forest. But he didn't. Must be because of that drink in his hand. Siri mused, a little startled at both the fact there was something capable of rendering Naruto intoxicated enough to not sense her or that he was even drinking in the first place. While she wouldn't claim to know all his habits and vices, she did notice that unlike most, if not all the warriors she had encountered across the worlds, Naruto never drank anything resembling alcohol, around her at least. So for him to not only be drinking something resembling alcohol but also be muddled enough to not even notice her presence, even when his absurd senses allowed him to sense wherever she was, it was unusual to say the least. It doesn't matter, now's my chance. Another moment passed before Siri brushed aside her growing concerns, and finding she wasn't going to get any more information from her current position, figured this was her chance to finally repay Naruto for all of the pranks he played on her these past few weeks, especially one in particular. Up to this day, she still didn't know how Naruto managed to replace the thick, nigh-permanent black mascara layer around her eyes for a dreadful neon orange. Not that she particularly disliked the color, but it looked absolutely hideous on her. So although there seemed to be something odd going on, there was no way in hell she was going to pass this rare chance up. Let's see how you like it when it's you getting pranked, Naruto. Siri wickedly smirked, her brilliant white teeth gleaming in the dark as she leaned down to apply all of her training from Geralt and Vesemir to silently stalk her still unsuspecting prey. And so step by careful step, Siri quietly crept closer to the target of her revenge, the hushed brushing sounds of her feet as she padded through the coarse grass blanketed by the whistling wind. After several tense moments, she finally arrived beneath the branch Naruto was perched on. Coming to a halt, she squinted the foot hanging just several feet above her, a mischievous grin lighting up her face. Sorry, but not sorry, about this, Naruto, but you've had this coming ever since the day you messed with my makeup. Vengeance shall be mine. Coiling her powerful muscles, Siri shot up from the ground, leaving a small impression in the grass as she leaped over 4 feet into the air to drag Naruto's foot down to the dirt with her. Ha, got you. The moment she felt Naruto's sturdy ankle between her gloved fingers, she immediately clamped down on it with the ferociousness of a drowner in water. For an instant, a wide grin split her face when she felt the relentless hold of gravity begin to pull the both of them back down, before quickly disappearing as or rather their, progress came to an abrupt halt. What the, oh, come on. Siri groaned in frustration when she saw a thin layer of nearly invisible chakra instinctively and stubbornly gluing its owner to the branch. Sighing, she closed her eyes in defeat as she prepared for the inevitable bout of teasing from Naruto for her failed prank. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Only after a whole minute passed in silence did Siri finally realize that Naruto still hadn't reacted to her. While strange, she didn't complain about the unexpected boon, instead using the time to prepare a suitable excuse for trying to unceremoniously dump him to the ground. Naruto, this isn't what it looks like, ah. Just as Siri shifted her gaze away from Naruto's sandal-clad foot to his face, a stray moonbeam struck her eyes, momentarily blinding her with its gentle brilliance. Rubbing away the stars under her eyelids with her free hand, they soon opened as she again turned her gaze upwards. As I was about to say. Once again, her words abruptly caught in her throat, but this time, it was not because of any moonbeam. For a moment, she dazedly stared at the man whose ankle she clung to as the dark shadows that once hid Naruto from view finally began to melt away under the light of the full moon. And when they finally did, she felt her heart painfully clench like a vice, because the man before her wasn't the one she knew. The Naruto Siri knew was warm, kind, mischievous, and unreasonably powerful. Yet it was not these traits that she found most important, rather it was who he was to her. A teacher unlike any other. A warrior without equal. And most of all, a friend who could somehow empathize with her despite his still frustratingly murky background. Not once in the past month she's known him did she ever see an exception to this. But now she could almost feel his age and an inkling of the numerous tribulations he must have gone through his body, his broad shoulders, capable of bearing the weight of the world itself, slumped forward, the aura of utter confidence and invincibility he wore like a second skin, gone. From the corner of her eyes, she caught sight as his hand, the reaper of over 100,000 lives, shakily rose for another swig of Oromisa's secret stash of enchanted Failnerve. However, what troubled and startled her the most were the tears that steadily trickled down from the corner of his closed eyes along the side of his scarred cheeks as he continued to silently face the starlit sky. Perhaps it was not her place to do so, but at that very moment, an unbidden desire to climb up and hold him tight, to shield him from whatever could possibly make somebody like him with godlike power, cry. And it was this desire that caused her to unconsciously tighten her grip, accomplishing what her initial jump couldn't. The Rinna Sharingan, eyes that could enrapture the world itself, slowly cracked open, casting all its path in an eerie lavender glow as Naruto tilted his gaze away from the lonely moon. And when those orbs of creation and destruction finally alighted on Siri, she felt her breath catch in her throat, almost forgetting how to breathe as the 9 tomo lazily spun and gradually drew her deeper into its bottomless depths. So captivated was she by Naruto's eyes, Siri didn't even feel her slackened hand let go of his ankle. Oof! A small grunt forced its way through Siri's lips as her ass landed on the unforgiving ground, quickly breaking whatever spell bound her. Ow, when did I fall to the ground? Her memory of the past few seconds momentarily scrambled. Siri winced as she rubbed at the stinging pain that flared from her bruised but cheeks, lamenting how her prank had backfired on her. However, a quiet chuckle from above caused her to abruptly remember the short chain of memories that led to her current position. Snapping her head back up, she suddenly shivered when a pair of glazed, grief-stricken cerulean orbs stared right into her own before returning their attention back to the heavens, a sad smile on his face. For several minutes, she continued to just sit there afore a disappointed frown pulled down her lips. He didn't see me, did he? While fleeting, Siri had seen the glassy look in his eyes before he looked away. That was the look of someone lost in his memories, something she was personally very familiar with. It was the same expression she saw every time she looked into a mirror or water whenever she had a quiet moment to herself to remember who she was before all of this. Still, it pained her for somebody she had come to care about to not even notice her or her presence, despite looking straight at her. I can't leave him alone, not when he's like this. Despite not being entirely sure how to console him, Avalakh was not one to console anyone. If he even knew how to, Siri was still determined to at least do something to snap him out of his current state. Deeply inhaling, Siri called out, "Hey! Nr-." Before her words were once again halted, she would remember tonight as the night she never finished a sentence, when she felt a strong wind whip her ashen bangs back as something passed by her at impossible speeds. A blur, as black as night with a streak of silver as brilliant and lustrous as the stars above, rushed past her at that very moment before coming to a stop after effortlessly leaping onto the branch Naruto rested on. "Arya!" Siri mumbled as she peered up at Arya under the pale moonlight. She was like a divine fairy who had descended from the heavens to the mortal realm pure and untainted. It mattered not whether she wore unflattering scaled leather armor or that ragged gashes streaked about parts of it, nothing could detract from her presence and beauty. Standing before Naruto, Arya swept her gaze across the land before fixing her attention on Siri, something in her eyes rooting her to the ground. Sharp forest green orbs flecked with molten gold met orange tinted emeralds as Arya intensely stared down from above for a moment before delicately nodding. "Go back, Siri, you need not worry about Naruto any longer." Without another word, Arya broke off their connection while turning back to the blonde, the ice in her eyes swiftly melting away into tender concern as she gracefully sat down, her tightly leather-bound legs swung over the branch. "You do not have to face this alone, Naruto, I'm here." Gently leaning forward until their foreheads touched, Arya reached out through their bond, easily brushing aside the flimsy barriers separating the two before soothingly melding their minds together into one. The wild and haunting music echoing through her mind could permanently incapacitate any mortal, but such melodies served only to comfort and bring back the blonde from the silent storms ravaging his consciousness. "Arya." Clarity briefly flickered back into his misty azure eyes before Naruto abruptly let go of the fail nerve and tugged her backwards into his firm chest. His arms tightly wrapped around her stomach as if afraid she would disappear like a passing illusion, just like everyone else had back at home. "Forgive me for I have done, but don't leave me, Arya, not like her. Please." Burying his head in her silky hair, Naruto hoarsely whispered into her sensitive pointed ears, sending shivers running down her spine and a faint rosy blush up her flawless alabaster cheeks. As he said those words, a flood of memories ranging from a ridiculously pink-haired woman with a larger-than-normal forehead and sparkling viridian eyes to a cold man just slightly shorter than Naruto himself with what oddly reminded her of a upside-down duck for hair and a pair of mismatched eyes which she knew currently rested in her lover's eye sockets. But the figure who popped up the most was of a petite dark purple-haired woman with eyes the color of the purest pearls. Image after image of her appeared, some in form-fitting shinobi clothing, some in foreign casual clothes, and one in a stunning wedding kimono that dazzled even her who had seen more than her fair share of lords and ladies. However, what remained consistent no matter what she wore was the blinding love and adoration that shone from her Byakugan, no matter how old or exhausted she was. What startled Arya the most in the end was how bright and clear each of the memories were, undiluted by the flow of time or by the haze the enchanted fail nerve should have brought its user. And so, for a mere fraction of a second, the barest hint of jealousy stained Arya's heart. It made her wonder just how many people elves, humans, dwarves, and even Urgles alike would be able to recall a loved one who had passed away almost half a century ago with such clarity, and with such fondness. It made her wonder, if she too passed away, who would remember her as so? Would her mother? Would Eragon? Would Naruto? Perhaps it was the moon above affecting her thoughts, but she briefly even wondered whether she was but a replacement for Hinata. Such ugly emotions and doubts were quickly stomped out of existence as the logical part of her mind promptly reasserted itself over her budding emotional side. Months of sharing their memories, both the good and especially the bad, through their accidental bond had cleared the both of them of such fears. It was because of this that the matter of Naruto's previous wife never caused any awkwardness between them. Perhaps another would have found it boring to know everything about her partner, but neither felt anything like that. It was because of this that the shell she had erected around her war-tempered spirit could finally crack open and allow her to truly experience love. Hinata was Hinata, Arya was Arya. They were as different as the moon was from the sun, their personalities almost polar opposites. They didn't even look similar, despite the fact they were both curvaceous. She stood over half a head taller than his former lover. Aside from that, Arya also knew better than to envy the woman in her mind, especially when she knew what today was in the real world. Today marked the anniversary and death of both his closest friends and confidants as well as his wife, Hinata Hyuga. She had seen him suffer through the years, felt the weight of his pain, grief, and despair, even as he was forced to bear body-rending agony as his body attempted to rip itself apart. She had felt how he wanted to die, to join the ones he loved most of all, to be free of the pain. And nobody, not even she, would have blamed him despite her elven ways and values. Yet, he endured, his resolve forever strong even when he knelt and paid homage before their graves, unwilling to fall to temptation and let Kaguya, the mother of all chakra, unleash her wrath upon the world. Never. Staring deep into those bottomless pools, Arya didn't resist and instead snuggled deeper into his arms as she rested her lightly calloused, yet soft, fingers on his larger hands, a rosy blush on her porcelain cheeks. Shutting their eyes, the world faded away as they merged their souls more intimately than any earthly pair of lovers could ever dream of doing. Below, Siri had long begun the short trek back to the spacious cabin Naruto had grown for her, complete with a fully furnished bath and bedroom. As the two dissolved into the distance and her dwelling came into view, the scene of Arya and Naruto embracing flipped through her head. I know many a painter who would kill for the opportunity to see what I just saw. A scene where an elven woman, as dazzling and cold as the moon above, tenderly embraced a devilishly handsome godlike human was one she knew to be irresistible to any artist. Opening the door, a bitter frown tugged the corners of Siri's lips when she remembered Naruto's vulnerable form. Too tired from both the earlier training and previous events, she didn't bother with the bath. She would take one tomorrow after she woke up, crashing against the sinfully soft mattress and cushy pillows. The last thought running through her head before sleep claimed her was despite practically living with the man for almost a month, it was only after this that she realized. She really didn't know anything about Naruto. Flashback end. Ever since that night, Siri paid closer attention to Naruto, who remained oblivious to what happened. She was grateful for that, it would turn things awkward between them if he knew. This allowed her to see an unguarded Naruto. Using her Witcher training, Siri finally saw the brief glimpses of sadness that occasionally crossed his gaze when he thought she wasn't looking. However, she had never seen him outright brood. In fact, Naruto seemed to abhor such an action, instead preferring to covertly hide away any negative emotions behind his natural warmth and mischief. Just what could have made him crack? A sickening crack followed by a short, stifled cry of pain echoed through the glade as a blunted kunai hurtled through the air and slammed into Siri's unprotected shoulder, instantly fracturing the area where her arm met her shoulder blade. Falling to the ground, she clutched at the broken bones as unbidden tears sprang from her eyes, angry not at the clone who caused the injury, but rather at herself for stupidly letting down her guard. Perhaps it wasn't the best of ideas to lose her focus turning training, especially during a session supervised by his clones. Siri quietly mumbled, gritting her pearly white teeth in an effort to ignore the now familiar pain. She had broken more bones and coughed more blood in the past several weeks than she had her entire life. Sometimes she wondered whether she was safer out there with the wild hunt on her tail than over here with Naruto supervising her training. It was completely different from Avalakh-HS. I can't believe of all the times I complained about Avalakh-HS methods, even if lately they haven't really worked. Still, while painful and dangerous, it's hard to argue with the results. Siri. You alright? As Siri mused about the polar opposite teaching methods, the real Naruto who had been playing around with Arya quickly blurred away before kneeling before Siri with glowing green hands on her shoulder. As he injected ribbons of potent healing chakra into Siri's shoulder, Naruto lightly scolded her, "Geez Siri, just how many times does this make? You would think that by now you would know better than to lose focus in the middle of training." The bite from his words were largely nullified by the worry in his eyes. Despite the dangerous training, Siri knew by now that while Naruto could be, and was, a sadistic bastard while teaching her, Arya, Eragon, and Azura, he didn't actually enjoy seeing them get injured, especially not when they were seriously injured like her shoulder. At least she didn't think so. Thank you. Siri nodded in thanks when the last sliver of bone moved back into place, though the area surrounding her joint was still tender. Although Naruto could patch up any cut, bruise, broken bone, or internal bleeding, her body still remembered the hurt for a while before fading. No worries. Naruto casually waved away her thanks before suddenly cocking his head to the side. For several seconds, neither said anything until he quietly sighed, his eyes shut, an earlier smile gone. Both curious and alarmed by his actions, Siri hurriedly asked, "What is it, Naruto? What happened?" Before he could utter a word, it was Arya who answered her question as she strode over from the trees. "It is time for the final stage of our war to begin." Siri shivered upon seeing a chilly gleam enter the elf's hardened eyes. "It is time for Galbatorix to die." Hovering high up in the sky, Eragon and Saphira looked very much like a scintillating sapphire if said sapphire was 100 feet in length as they surveyed the capital of the empire, Uryubane. Or at least whatever parts of it they could see not hidden beneath the shade of the enormous stone overhang covering most of the city. Eyeing the at least 300 feet walls and multitude of ballistae and catapults pointed their way, they both frowned at the seemingly impenetrable city. After several moments, Eragon broke the silence. "What do you think, Saphira?" Saphira snorted in response. "Does it matter what kind of human resistance we meet? Our sole task in this battle is to fight and rip apart the egg breaker. Doing anything else will either leave us too drained or distracted to do so." While cold, Eragon understood that his partner for life meant no harm. And in a way, he understood her position. How could he not? It was practically the only thing the two talked about after the Battle of Bellatona whenever they weren't getting pummeled while training with Naruto. Yet he still had his doubts of her simplistic view. "I know what you mean, Saphira, but still, how could we not even lend a helping hand? Look at all those war machines. Eragon pointed at all of the ballistae and catapults that lined the top of the wall at regular intervals. No doubt more lay hidden in the shadow of the wall. Even with the elves, the Varden will lose tens of thousands of men before one can even stand on top of that wall. A cloud of smoke puffed out of her nostrils as his dragon sighed in frustration. What do you want me to say, little one? I don't like the idea of the ones who have fought by our side from the beginning throwing themselves into death's cold arms any more than you do. But what can we do about it? The moment we enter the fray, we will need to expend a large amount of energy just to protect ourselves, never mind the others. And then when we finally face Galbatorix, exhausted and maybe wounded, it'll be as if we were handing ourselves on a silver platter. Or did you forget what Naruto informed us back then? The young rider frowned at the conundrum. He most certainly did not forget the worrying piece of intelligence Naruto had given them a week back afore vanishing in a ripple, with Arya and his guest. For Galbatorix of all people to, if grudgingly, give away some of his more powerful Eldenari and have them target key members of the resistance, it was as if saying dragons could be vegetarians or some ridiculous nonsense like that. Minutes passed by as Eragon glanced between the two armies until he threw his hands up in the air. I don't know what to do, Saphira. Both plans have their share of problems, whether it be for us or the Varden. His shoulders slumped powerlessly as he mumbled, if only there was some way to bait Galbatorix out of his shell. Then all of our problems would be solved. I see you are troubled, Eragon Finiral. A mellow voice, unaffected by the gusts of wind, resounded through the air. Master. Eragon and Saphira cried out in surprise as they turned to see Oromiz and Glader making their way towards them, who looked very much like a mountain of gold soaring through the air. When the elder dragon rider pair approached their students, their eyes widened upon seeing just how big Saphira had gotten. After going through the traditional elven greeting, a rumbling mental voice brimming with majestic chords filled the younger pair's minds. Although Eragon had informed us of how large you had grown, Saphira Bjartskiller, I had believed his description an exaggeration. But now, I stand corrected. You both have done well to get this far. Eragon Shadeslayer and Saphira Brightscales. Warmth infused their bodies at their mentor's praise. Oromiz, on the other hand, said nothing more as he slowly swept his stormy grey eyes over Eragon, as if looking for something. Had it been before finding his true name, Eragon would have flinched under the intense scrutiny of his teacher's sharp gaze. But now, such things merely passed by him like the dead leaves in autumn. So when he saw the resolute light instead of the usual uncertainty in Eragon's eyes, Oromiz proudly smiled, satisfied with how his apprentice had grown. Well met, Eragon Finiral. You have grown into a finer rider and man I could have hoped, and have brought friends I thought were gone forever. Nodding his approval, he and Glader both closed their eyes as they stretched his mind towards the area behind Eragon, stirring up a mental storm so great Eragon, for all of his unlocked chakra, could not bear to listen to any longer. It was not a matter of strength, but rather that it was quite uncomfortable to constantly listen to a deafening cacophony. There simply wasn't a need to continue listening to all of the greetings echoing about. When they were done, Oromiz turned his gaze towards the familiar tall spire-like buildings made of a flawless fusion of glass and stone, impossible to have been made by human hands, a melancholic expression on his face. Illyria. Below him, Glader too shared in his wistfulness as eyed the once beautiful city, now stained by greed and corruption. Beside him, Eragon sighed when he saw the faint veil of mist in both of his master's eyes, who no doubt were feeling pangs of nostalgia and melancholy of seeing their home as Galbatorix's den. Then he did something he never would have done had it not been for a certain blonde. Leaping over, Eragon quickly steadied himself before striding along the golden dragon's broad neck to stand next to Oromiz. Once along his master, he firmly clapped his hand on the elf's slender shoulder. The unexpected contact jerked Oromiz out of his brief reverie, causing him to look with slightly widened eyes to his right. Don't worry, Oromiz Elda, we will take back Illyria and free the other Eldenari. With the two of us, Saphira, Glader, Umaroth and the other Eldenari, as well as Arya and Naruto, it is only a matter of time before Alagizia is freed from Galbatorix's reign. For a second, Oromiz simply stared at his pupil before the corners of his thin lips curved up in a small smile. You are right, Eragon Finiral. With all of us finally united, we shall prevail against Galbatorix and his madness. But Eragon, Oromiz narrowed his eyes, did you consider how to defeat him? Remember, Naruto Finiral did say he will leave the battle against Galbatorix to you. Only if you are about to die will he interfere. About that, there is something I could not risk telling you over scrying. At Eragon's foreboding words, Oromiz frowned while turning his full attention to him. Whatever it was his student couldn't tell him over scrying despite all of their words of silence and isolation was bound to be on the level of revealing his true name. His small frown only deepened upon hearing his next words. Even you, Oromi Zelda and Gladrelda, must swear to never reveal what I'm about to tell you unless both Saphira and I agree to it. A heated growl boomed through his mind. Even if it is you, you dare to have the two of us, your masters, swear a binding oath without even giving us a hint of what we're. Enough, Gladr. Surprised silence instantly pervaded the area upon Oromiz's raised voice. Sighing, he looked deeply into Eragon's brown eyes as he spoke to Gladr. Look through my eyes, Gladr, and tell me that Eragon Finiral has any less than honorable purpose. Look into his eyes and remember who his father is. And so Gladr did, and when he saw how clear and free of impurities Eragon's eyes were, there was no need to say anything else. Huffing, the ancient dragon conceded his point. So be it. I swear that nothing said here will be known unless both you and Saphira agree to doing so. On his neck, Oromiz also made a similar oath. I too swear that nothing said here will be known unless both you and Saphira agree to doing so. Upon hearing his mentor's oaths, Eragon quickly severed his link from the Eldenari behind him before forming the strongest isolation barrier he knew. Before either Oromiz or Gladr could question him, he directly whispered into their minds, grabbing a hold of the elf to prevent him from falling as a fierce shudder ripped through their frames. Impossible. Several hours later, gathered under a single war tent, around a table with a map of Urbane, and surrounded by the strongest of silencing wards, the leaders of the multi-species alliance gathered for the final battle plan. Outside, Saphira, Gladr, Azura, and the newest addition Ciri got to know each other better, especially the latter three. The eldest dragon especially was surprised by the powers and mutations the Black Dragon and Otherworlder had, having never seen anything like it even during the height of the Dragon Rider Order. On the side, Saphira snorted in exasperation mainly at the amount of interest her teacher had for her fellow dragon. However, the inside of the tent was not as cheery. Despite having already planned the attack during the march over, there still remained several missing key aspects. Eragon, Oromiz, most of the plans for the upcoming battle have already been completed. The only thing left to finalize is, how are we going to kill Galbatorix? For if we cannot kill him, it won't matter how many men and women we throw at Urbane. We'll all die, and this time, there won't be any escape. Ajihad bluntly told the two riders while throwing a glance towards Naruto in hopes the blonde would change his mind. But all he got was short shake of his head. Helplessly sighing, he turned back to the riders and Queen Islanzati. To his surprise, it was Eragon and not the elder rider who answered. As you all know, even with the Eldenari, my teacher Oromi Zelda, and Gladrelda, it will be difficult to come up on top. The air grew heavy at his words. Just a half an hour earlier, the mood had been so light after revealing the Eldenari's existence to King Orin, King Hrothgar, Nar Garshvog and the Werkat King. But now, oh, then what exactly do you plan on doing, Shadeslayer? Or are you just going to fly into his no doubt heavily fortified keep and just do what, improvise? King Orin sarcastically spat out before downing a cup of dark red wine, his mood worsening by the moment, no doubt due to the giant Kull standing just a few feet away from him. It's funny, I'm starting to appreciate a Kull's presence more than a member of my own race. Eragon quietly mused. Throughout the journey to the Empire's heart, the King of Serta had changed, and much to everyone's frustration, not for the better. However, it mattered not, for all his ill temper, his commitment to the fight against the Mad King was never in doubt. Besides, he had a valid point, one even Islanzati was most curious about. Crossing his arms, Eragon calmly answered. We do have a strategy, however, it will take Naruto to protect you all from these Eldenari wielders. Without him, even if we do triumph over Galbatorix, it will be a Pyrrhic victory at best, and a massacre at worst. With that, everyone's heads swiveled towards the blonde who continued to lean against a wooden post. For a few seconds, nobody said anything, until finally, Naruto broke the silence. As I said before, I will not directly participate in the slaying of Galbatorix or the destruction of the city, for this is a fight you of Allegezia must bleed for in order to make it meaningful. Frowns appeared all across the table at the harsh words except for a select few, those select few being Eragon, Oromiz, Arya, Ajihad, and Islanzadi. They knew the blonde better than that, while the latter never wanted his protection in the first place. However, others were not so understanding. Slamming his hands against the table, King Orin erupted in a geyser of fury at Naruto's response. Then what do you want? Do you want us to pay you, like the mercenary you were, or rather are? Because if so, that is enough out of you, King Orin. Ajihad interjected his fellow leader's rant while leveling a steady stare at him. Naruto here never had to involve himself in our war, and yet he did. And I'll have you know, he has saved not only my life, but countless others, both on our side and those who could be saved. It is because of him, our army has grown so large and able to contend on equal footing with the Mad Kings. Off to the side, Naruto frowned at Orin's response, not at how much of an asshole he had become, but rather at his reason for becoming so. It was natural for men to toughen up and become more acerbic during a war, but it was odd how badly and irrational Orin had reacted, especially given his originally odd and childlike nature. Perhaps there was something else influencing him. Something more material. Arya, try using your Tensigen to see into Orin's body, especially his brain. I heard he enjoyed experiments, sometimes with toxic elements, but I had hoped those were merely rumors. Now I'm not so sure. Arching an eyebrow at Naruto, Arya closed her eyes and sent a small burst of chakra coursing through her eyes, the floral Tensigen whirring to life. Due to the nature of the eyes of reincarnation, there was no need for them to be open and thus, could be hidden when activated. However, upon seeing the state of Orin's brain and body, even she could barely keep them from flying open in shock and disgust. While no stranger to poisons, to think Orin's seemingly harmless pastimes were actually so deadly. Beside her, Naruto had already glimpsed through Arya's eyes. With his knowledge of the human body taught by Tsunade herself before breaching the barrier, he was quite sure a human's kidneys, liver and brain were not supposed to be so shriveled. No wonder King Orin is so irritable all the time. The amount of pain he must be going through with his withering organs must be excruciating, never mind the burden of war. Armed with this knowledge, the blonde decided to forgive or ignore any malicious comments sent his way, for now. Or at least until he healed him, because whether he liked the man or not, King Orin was in the end a rather capable king of a nation full of innocent people. Coughing into his hand, Naruto continued from where he left off. Although I say that, protecting you all doesn't count as something direct. So yes, Eragon, I will make sure everyone at this table makes it out of this fight in one piece, no matter our relationship. He glanced over at the king of Serta and Grim Half-Paw of the Wercats. In addition, I will also let Azura join in on the fight, no doubt he is eager for the battle. The heavy weight that once blanketed the council lifted as King Orin merely grumbled a bit before leaning back. Even better. If that's so, then we can commence the attack tomorrow at dawn. With Glade, Saphira, and Azura transporting us, Blodgarm, and his spellweavers, we should be able to cut a path directly to the citadel. With the Dothdared, it should be no problem to get rid of any magical wards in our path. From there, all of us together with the Eldenari will take down Galbatorix once and for all, the Dothdared as our trump card. Eragon mentioned the ancient weapon to draw attention away from his true trump card, a card he wishes will not be needed. And how will you all get there without being detected? 3 dragons and a host of riders and elves are hardly inconspicuous, especially under the light of day. And even with all your wards, you would find yourselves exhausted like an arrow at the end of its flight from blocking all the catapults, ballistae, and arrows sent your way. This time, it was Queen Islanzadi who spoke out. That is where Azura will come in. With his impenetrable hide and countless wards, even if he can't kill everyone, nobody can hurt him as he distracts the city, especially when bolstered with Naruto's infinite reserves. Then depending on the situation, we can have him come to our aid, especially if Shuriken is as large as you said he was. Eragon quickly replied. They all shuddered while trying to picture a dragon 8 times Glader's size. Even just him falling would be akin to a small mountain dropping on them. After discussing the details of timing and placement and signaling for another hour, one last question came up before they dispersed. Our plans are finished and we'll move to attack tomorrow, at dawn. But there is one thing I'm curious about. The leader of the Varden turned his black domed head towards Naruto. How will you protect us? Will your clones do so? For the second time, the heads of everyone in the tent rotated towards him. Nope, and you will never see them unless they're absolutely needed. But rest assured, no one will be able to kill you with them around. Naruto reassured them all while ignoring the doubtful and almost disdainful looks from a certain pair. He would sort at least one of them out later. Soon after walking out of the stifling tent, Naruto and Arya leaped onto Azura's back alongside Siri. "Wait, Naruto Finiral." Just as the black dragon was about to lift off, a captivating voice rich in vibrato rang out behind them. Patting Azura's neck, Naruto had him round about to face the one who called out to them. Behind him, Siri curiously poked her head over their shoulders to get a look at the owner of the magnetic voice. And what she saw surprised her. Garbed in a golden corselet of scale armor, with a jeweled helm upon her head and her red, white-trimmed cape clasped about her shoulders was the Queen of the Elves. By her side, a long, slim sword hung from her narrow waist. But though the extravagant armor startled her, that wasn't what got her attention. Rather, something else about the woman bothered her. Wait a second, could it be? As she watched Naruto and Arya dismount from Azura, Siri quickly realized the number of similarities between Arya and her. They could have passed as twins, if not for the few differences between them, mainly their different hair and skin colors along with Arya's gentler-looking almond-shaped eyes. Stopping several feet from Islanzati, Naruto warm greeted her. "Your Majesty, it's good to see both you and Oromis safe and sound after Gilead. I was worried after seeing Oromis's condition." "Indeed, Naruto Finiral. Had you arrived several seconds later, Oromis and Glade would have most likely passed away. I must thank you and the Manoa tree again once we return to Elesmera." She tilted her proud head down in thanks before peering towards Arya to examine the many physical changes her daughter had gone through. "However, that is not what I stopped you for. I must ask you, daughter, where will you be in the coming battle? Will you be with us assaulting the walls of Uryubane or staying by Naruto's side?" Glancing between Naruto and her mother, Arya shook her head. "No, mother, I will not be joining the assault on the walls or staying by Naruto's side. Instead, I will be joining Eragon and Oromis to bring the fight to Galbatorix." Back on top of Azura, Siri's eyes widened when she realized the woman who had rigorously trained her for the past month was a princess in her own right, just like her. Her surprise lasted only a short while as she tuned back into the conversation. Horror filled Islanzati's emerald eyes. What good would that accomplish Arya? Blodgarm and the other spellcasters I assigned, never mind Oromis and Glade, are all more accomplished in the arts of magic and more experienced in battle as well. Instead, it would be more helpful if you were to stay by my side and seek out the Eldenari users hidden within the army's ranks. Naruto took a step back from the mother-daughter pair. This was not a conversation he had any right to interfere in. Crossing the small gap with long, graceful steps, Arya stood mere inches from her mother, a soft smile on her lips. "Mother, had you asked me before the Battle of Feinster, perhaps I would have agreed to your words. Yes, Blodgarm, his spell-weavers, and Oromis all know the ancient language better than I. And yes, they may all have more experience than I do, but there is something I have that they don't." She closed her eyes before reopening them, the blazing Tensigan sparking to life much to Islanzati's shock. "I have pure power, and the only one capable of rivaling Galbatorix's massive store of Eldenari, other than Naruto, is me. Just by myself, I can tie up at least half, if not most, of the Eldenari Galbatorix has and give the others a chance to kill him." Turning away, Arya absently brushed at her left shoulder. "It is my responsibility, as one who bears the yaw, to do all I can for Allegezia and her people, one last time." She mumbled the last 3 words in her mind, knowing the next time they come back may not be for a while. "Yet the whole of your life has been so short," Islanzati forlornly remarked as she reached out to cup Arya's smooth cheeks. "You have devoted yourself to fighting Galbatorix all these years since your father's death, but only now are you beginning to know of the joys life can provide. And in those years, we have spent such a small amount of time together, a handful of days scattered throughout a century. It is only since you brought Saphira and Eragon to Elesmera that we have begun to speak once more, as a mother and daughter ought. I would not lose you again so soon, Arya. Perhaps in another time, another life," Arya would have coldly replied to her mother, but her time with a certain blonde helped ease away the bite Islanzati's banning of her person once had. "And you won't, mother. You will not lose me." She placed her hands on her mother's cheeks, as Islanzati did just seconds before. "Not in this life, or the next. Once this war is over, there will be time for us to be together as we always should have, as mother and daughter. Nothing more, and nothing less." When Arya saw that a hint of hesitation still remained in her mother's eyes, she repeated what she said, but this time in the ancient language. You will not lose me. Not in this life, or the next. And we shall be together, as mother and daughter should. Behind her, Naruto came forth and laid a comforting hand on his love's shoulder in silent support of her steely determination. To say such binding words in the ancient language, even if they no longer bound her as tightly as before, still said much of her utter confidence in returning alive, as well as her forgiveness for all the years she was banished from Islanzadi's presence. For a moment, Islanzadi stood stock still, before a proud smile as radiant as the morning sun bloomed on her lips. Leaning forward, she kissed Arya once on each cheek. Then go, and go with my blessings. And take no more risks than you must. Nor you. And the two of them embraced. As they separated, Islanzadi looked at Naruto and softly pleaded, watch over her, I implore you. But know this, a hard glare fixed him in place, should she come to harm like she did in Feinster, should your insistence on not directly fighting the war result in her injury or death, there will be no place in this world where you will be able to hide from mine and the elves' fury. Despite Islanzadi's almost outright threat and near hypocrisy, neither Naruto nor Arya said anything to dispute her. This was a mother's right and they both understood that. Wrapping a hand around Arya's waist, he kissed the tip of her pointy ears, much to her utter embarrassment. Really, just what was Naruto doing in front of the Queen of Elves, her own mother? Quickly, she jabbed at the space between his ribs, causing the blonde to grunt in mock pain as a creeping blush painted a stark image against her fair neck. Opposite of the pair, a bluish-green vein began to pulse on Islanzadi's temple. Despite what she said to Azura back then, it was clear to all that such an open display of affection was towing the line of her neutrality towards their relationship. Fortunately, Naruto responded before Islanzadi's emerging motherly overprotectiveness could lash out. She is important to me too, Islanzadi. And while I should tell you to have more faith in your daughter, a pair of icy orbs met blazing emeralds. There's no way in hell I'll let anyone or anything injure her like in Feinster. I promise you that. A few seconds passed as Islanzadi stared into his cold, steadfast eyes, so different from how they usually were. This was a man who would rip apart the world regardless of his life and damn the consequences if it meant protecting the ones he cherished. Finally, Islanzadi looked away. So be it, Naruto Uzumaki. May we meet on the battlefield tomorrow and the stars watch over you, for you carry the blessing of Islanzadi Drottning. Then with a flick of her cloak, she strode off towards the elven camp without a hint of resistance from the busy encampment. With a single bound, Naruto and Arya took their places on Azura's neck with Siri behind the elf. This time, with no one else trying to stop them, the dragon coiled his powerful muscles before surging up into the sky. Once they leveled off, Arya took the opportunity to lay her cheek against Naruto's shoulder. Though she wanted nothing more than to kiss her lover after his promise back down on the ground, doing so in front of Siri was a bit much. It was also at this time that Siri began to speak about something that had been on her mind for the past several days. Naruto, let me fight in the attack tomorrow. What? Naruto snapped his head back in astonishment only to see a resolute look on her face. Siri, are you serious? This is not like a simple fight between a few dozen men. This will be a clash between massive armies with arrows and spells flying about. Even with your incredible powers, it will be incredibly dangerous as just one of these spells could spell the death of you. Then just place the wards you have around Azura on me. After all the kindness you two have shown me, let me repay this debt. Besides, an amused gleam entered Siri's eyes, you know I'll go anyways, right? Rapidly blinking several times, Naruto in the end rolled his eyes in exasperation. Fine. I did tell you I wouldn't coddle you after all. Just remember, try to limit those spins you love so much, and watch your left side, you tend to drop your guard there after a mere few hours into training. A series of eye twitches burst out as a thunderous shout erupted out of Siri's mouth. A mere few hours? Anyone normal would have dropped dead after several minutes of trying to dodge bone-breaking kunai and 120-pound weights on each limb. A tinkling laugh rang out from between them, causing a vein to throb near Siri's temple. Don't you dare laugh at me, Arya. I still remember half the times I got knocked out was because of you bashing me unconscious with that sword of yours. Hey, not you too, Azura. Under the chuckling duo and fuming Siri, a shiver tore through Azura's body as he snorted out a plume of smoke in amusement at their antics. Finally, she too began to smile before beginning to snicker, their laughter echoing over the bustling Varden camp as they prepared for the bloody assault tomorrow. Tomorrow would be the end of an era. Far away, in the living city of Elesmera, a red dragon lay curled in front of a house hung from a tree as he enjoyed the warming rays of the sun. Inside, an elf unlike any other in Alagizia slumbered on, oblivious to the defining battle that was about to be fought tomorrow. Deep within his lavish halls and surrounded by hundreds of traps, Galbatorix sat on his throne, an unsheathed aquamarine blade in hand. Coal eyes blazing with carefully restrained rage and madness stared at the giant golden doors as he waited for his opponents. Speaking out to no one in particular, the joints in his hands popped and cracked under his crushing grip. Tomorrow may be the day I die, Naruto. But even after my death, I shall show you true despair. Ha 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 ha. His insane laughter promised an ocean of blood would flow, and no one, not even the mighty Naruto, could stop it. Chapter 68, Battle of Yoryubain, Part 1. Mere hours after the war council dispersed, a pale dawn broke out across the plains, coloring both the Empire's final stronghold and the Varden alike in gold with the sun's weak rays. Row upon row, column by column, a sea of gleaming metal and stiff leather armor and weapons along with their diverse wielders met the new day with solemn silence. Their march down the sloping fields to the walls of Yoryubain muffled by rags stuffed and wrapped between their weapons and feet. Soaring above the wispy clouds and out of sight of both enemy and friend, over a dozen men and women sat upon 3 dragons without a sound, their sharp ears peeled for the signal that would indicate the beginning of the attack. Standing on top of Azura, Naruto glanced to the side at his youngest student on his sapphire dragon as several elves sat behind him, including the blue-furred Blodgarm. Though Eragon seemed calm and collected, he could sense the boy's nervousness and anxiety rolling of him in waves as he grimly glared down at the city. Let's see if I can knock some of that out of him. Patting Azura's neck, he had him move opposite of Saphira, much to everyone's confusion. Hey Eragon! Naruto abruptly yelled out over the wind, startling the young teenage rider and the others. What is it, Naruto? Eragon called out, tilting his head away from the ground as the Varden continued their advance on the towering walls as he wondered what Naruto wanted to say to him at this point, his head full of the inevitable mass casualties on both sides that was bound to happen in the next few hours, only to see a finger pointed his way. Confused by the gesture, Eragon furrowed his brow as he first stared at the finger then upwards at the pair of confident blue eyes staring right back at him. It's heavy, isn't it, Eragon? To carry the hopes and lives of millions of men, women, and children all across Alagizia as thousands, if not tens of thousands, shed their blood for you to do so, turns the legs to jelly. Opposite of Naruto, Eragon glanced away, his knuckles white as he tightly grasped Brisinger's hilt. He's right, despite having planned for this moment for months, despite having accumulated skill after skill, word after word, when it's time to act, all I can feel is fear. Not for my life, but fear that I might fail everyone in Alagizia. Below him, the Azure Dragon sensed his uneasy thoughts before sending a rush of warmth through their bond. Well, you know, if it were anyone else, I would worry whether Saphira had chosen wrongly, that of all people. It was a farm boy from some distant village that almost no one had heard about. Saphira snorted in displeasure at the blonde's words about her rider, which Naruto promptly ignored. But looking at the man you have grown into, I can say she couldn't have picked a finer rider. Thump. Eragon's heart began to pound, the ice that chilled his blood beginning to thaw. Whipping his gaze up, he saw Naruto proudly looking at him. Despite your age, you have picked up on techniques completely foreign to this land while learning everything you could from Oromiz, Glade, and the Eldenari at a rate faster than many shinobi back in the elemental nations. Thump. Thump. A toothy grin bloomed on the shinobi's face as he waved his hand about. But if you don't believe in yourself, look around you. Saphira, Oromiz, Glade, Blodgarm, Arya, Azura, Ajihad, Islanzadi, Hrothgar, me, and even those 2 assholes Grimmer and Orin are all here with you. You do not stand alone in this fight. So get in there and take down that tyrant like you were meant to, come on. Naruto shouted, his words ringing clear in the atmosphere. Seeing his friend and teacher curl his finger into a fist made Eragon unconsciously pull his own hand away from Briesinger before crashing against it. Instantly, a link was made and the sheer confidence Naruto felt in him coursed through him, sending a surge of hot blood furiously rushing through his veins as a fierce smile broke out on his lips. The cloud of fear that once gripped his heart scorched away under the blaze of his ignited courage. However, what he and the others, except Arya, didn't realize was that a sliver of bubbling crimson chakra had stealthily flashed between the two men afore just as equally, quickly disappearing into Eragon's body. Behind Oromiz, Arya elegantly arched an eyebrow at the one-sided exchange, only to meet a pair of fearless, yet worried cerulean orbs staring at her. Arya, no matter what, do not let down your guard in there. It worries me that Galbatorix made no mention of you despite knowing how important you are to me. It's not in his nature to ignore such an opportunity when he has already targeted your mother and the other leaders of the Varden. Just. A deafening trio of horn blasts blaring out from below indicated the start of the Varden's assault while drowning out whatever Naruto was about to say. Just, don't underestimate him, no matter how powerful you have gotten. Remember, you still haven't completely mastered the Tensigen after all. Naruto finished as Azura shifted beneath him, no doubt already reacting to the faint scent of blood wafting from the battlefield. It was their turn coming up after all. The blonde's heartwarming concern tugged at the corners of her lips. Don't worry too much, Naruto, with the wards you have taught me, it is unlikely anyone except the king can even lay a hand on me. And you know me, a chilly light entered her almond-shaped eyes, I never underestimate anyone, not even the weakest human. Naruto wryly chuckled at that. No you don't, no you don't. Good luck, Arya. He fondly remembered how when they first met, other than the first second, Arya had indeed gone all out on him, not caring for whether he was human or elf. Now that he thought about it, that duel might have been the moment that first triggered his interest in her, no matter how small. Behind him, Siri shot the two a confused glance before nonchalantly shrugging. It had come to her attention long ago that Naruto and Arya had more than a physical relationship and bond with each other. What with the numerous times she caught them making certain looks which by themselves wouldn't have been unusual, if, not for the lack of words, had she been anyone else not from Allegezia, she would have found it rather odd that they were able to seemingly hold entire conversations with just their eyes alone. But with her quick mind and willingness to accept the unacceptable, it didn't take long for her to guess that they were communicating through their minds. It was then another two blasts of the horn rang out, one short and another long, causing them all to tense. It was time for the operation to begin. With a bellowing roar, Azura snapped his head back with a bloodthirsty smile to look at his two passengers. Shall we dance, Naruto? Deep inside Naruto's mindscape, a large tick mark developed on a giant fox's forehead. Why do I suddenly feel like punting that little lizard around? Meh, I'll do that later anyways, hee. Back in the real world, Azura instinctively shivered when he heard a faint creepy giggling in the back of his mind. Unsealing his favorite sword, or hunk of iron as Arya called it, Kobikuribocho, which would also no doubt prove useful in fighting from Dragonback. Naruto chuckled at Azura copying his and Madara's catchphrase. Yeah, let's dance. With a mighty flap of his gleaming black wings, Azura abruptly climbed several more feet before bolting down like a bolt of black lightning, and, much to the displeasure of a certain someone, Asuraya. You stupid, Siri yelled when she was almost yanked out of the saddle. Her eyes shut as she leaned forward just in time to tightly wrap her arms around Naruto while gale force winds blew her ashen gray hair back. Chuckling, he didn't mind the arms wrapped about his waist. He had long begun to see the fiery dimensional traveler as somewhat as a surrogate sister. She certainly has the spirit of an Uzumaki. Naruto grinned as he eyed a crimson-robed commander gesturing at them. Ready your bows. 10,000 feet. Instantly, hundreds of bows along with several ballistas and trebuchets turned their attention away from the Varden to the descending dragon in the sky. Knock. 8,000 feet. Drawl. 5,000 feet. Mark. Now only 2,000 feet in the air, Naruto could easily hear the tightening of strings and ropes over the din of battle, the wooden frames groaning as they strained to hold the deadly missiles in place. Narrowing his eyes, he pointed Kobikuribocho at that particular spot. Azura, start from there. Not many have heard a dragon laugh, especially those as short-lived as humans. Yet as the trio approached the 300 feet tall walls of Uryubane, those scant few who managed to live past this day would uncontrollably tremble when they remembered a rumbling sound like the eruption of an ages-old volcano that shook the very air itself and chilled them to the bone as a nightmarish dragon disdainfully laughed at their pitiful attempts to harm him and his riders. The jagged scar that ran down Azura's chest then balefully glowed as he deeply inhaled to stoke the bellowing flames within him. all the while ignoring the annoying flying stones and ringing clinks as several tens of arrows from other areas of the wall harmlessly glanced off his armor plates. In fact, none would have touched him if he still had the wards Naruto first wove about him. But back in the Kamui dimension, he had insisted for him to rid him of all physical barriers. It felt wrong for him to feel absolutely nothing while in the heat of combat. Of course, as an arrow disintegrated to dust over his scar, that didn't include the ones around his scar and eyes as well as the wards that shielded him from more magical attacks. Safety first after all. Loose. Whoosh. The moment the three got within range, a black cloud of arrows, several stones over 300 pounds and 2 ballista bolts, each nearly 6 feet long and capable of punching through several horses, lanced through the sky. Ignoring the other projectiles, if something like the bolts were allowed to fly unchecked, they could punch through the thinly armored eyelid above a dragon's eyes. Even for Azura, despite his incredibly resilient armor and endurance, getting stabbed through the eye by something that long at such speed would undoubtedly prove crippling if not fatal. Unfortunately for the men operating and surrounding the ballistas, this was also the moment Azura unleashed a raging flood of hellfire. Nothing came close to the trio, whether it be arrow, or bolt, or stone. All was incinerated until not even ashes remained as the flames continued through the air to roll over the ramparts like a tidal wave. And like multicolored bubbles, wards and barriers protecting the soldiers popped and cracked as the energy needed to withstand such powerful flames drained in mere seconds. It mattered not how many wards against flames or heat there were, all was consumed under the black flames of Amaterasu. Yet despite the rampant death and destruction, it was a strangely silent affair. There were no screams of pain or gasping of last breaths, no creaking of smoldering wood or snapping of burning rope. There was not even a grunt of discomfort from the terrible heat that battered the soldiers before flames as hot as the sun immolated them from existence. Such powerful flames. For the first time, Siri witnessed in awe just how powerful Azura was. It was hard to believe that the dragon who was casually batted around by people less than a tenth his size and the dragon underneath her unleashing flames that would put to shame anything Triss or even the despicable Vilgeforts could conjure was the same dragon. Then again, I shouldn't be all that surprised, especially with Naruto as his rider. A wry grin spread her lips. Nothing is normal with him, not even me. However, she didn't have much time to ponder over the new discovery before Naruto shouted out at her. Siri? You might want to brace yourself. Broken out of her reverie, Siri's eyes almost popped out of her skull in horror upon seeing the quickly growing city wall. A wall no doubt enchanted with tens of wards designed against blunt impact, that they were about to crash into at sonic speed. Wait, shouldn't we be slowing down? A feral grin twisted Azura's draconian features. Nope. Oh hell no. Still hovering nearly 20,000 feet in the air, the company watched in suspended disbelief as the eldest of Rogmar the Dread's brood dive-bombed towards the impenetrable walls of Uryubane with no signs of slowing down or altering his path. When they saw several war machines adjust their aim, one of the elves on Glader's back couldn't hold back her indignity as she clenched the pommel of her sword. Just what is Naruto Finral thinking? How could he let Azura Brightscales do something as reckless like this? Along with her, several of her fellow elves frowned in agreement, though they stayed silent. Despite not being nearly as close to Naruto or Azura as to Eragon and Saphira, they couldn't help but worry about the two's seemingly suicidal charge. You underestimate both Azura and Naruto, Yela, especially Azura. Never have I seen a dragon with more potential than him. Trust me, he is as much a monster as his rider. Against expectations, it was Blodgarm who spoke out in Naruto's defense. Out of all the elves, including Arya and Oromiz, his bestial instincts were the strongest due to his more animal-like physiology. Something in those ringed eyes had made his instincts scream at him to step softly about him and those he was close to, or else face his terrible wrath. Off to the side, Arya, Eragon, and Oromiz nodded their agreement. They had seen, whether it be directly or indirectly, what the dragon was capable of. Twang! While Nvidia and the others contemplated over their leader's words, the release of hundreds of arrows stole their attention just in time for them to see Azura turn all before him to nothing. This did not surprise them. It would have been more startling if anything did survive through the flames, even if the utter decimation of the Empire's soldiers raised a few eyebrows. There should have been at least a few who were warded against flames. Though they wanted to keep watching, they didn't have the leisure to continue merely watching. It was time for them to move out. Let's go. Shouting out against the whistling wind, Eragon urged Saphira towards the central citadel of Uryubane, which was currently devoid of defenses. With a short roar, she mirrored what Azura did just a minute ago as she shot down to the ground, the giant mountain of burnished gold that was Glader close on her heels. They had probably made it down several hundred feet when a deafening crack shattered the air. Boom! Chunks of fortified stone exploded out with the force of a rampaging hurricane, instantly reducing the nearby defenders into bloody smears as Azura used his heavy metal hunk of a jaw to smash through the battlements, the special wards wreathed around its tip making it a crude, but effective battering ram. While the others felt their jaws drop in shock, Arya simply rolled her eyes in exasperation. Show off. The young dragon had obviously inherited Naruto's and Kurama's showy moves despite her efforts of trying to impress the beauty of the more subtle arts of attacking and killing. Then again, dragons were not known to be the most subtle of beings. Still, I can't argue with the results. A smile curved up her full lips. With the gaping hole in the wall that continued to crumble, they had indeed proved a most effective distraction as a deafening cheer rose from the Varden after they recovered from their shock, the defenders still desperately scrambling about. Immediately, the rebel army began to attack in earnest. Towering siege engines rumbled their way to the breach while several elves used spells to temporarily soar into the gap. The hatchling is most impressive, especially his physique in flames. I would expect nothing less from the firstborn of the greatest of our kind, Glade remarked as they soared past one of the 6 remaining elven towers, ignoring the alarmed shouts as some of the soldiers noticed the presence of an additional 2 dragons. Yes, the hatchling of Rogmar the Dread is indeed most remarkable, no doubt, his eggmates will be just as exceptional. Oromiz glanced back, admiring how, other than a quick shake of his head, unaffected Azura seemed to be despite having plowed through nearly 40 to 50 feet of solid stone, mortar, and old magic. However, I suspect it's more than just his noble inheritance. Eyeing Azura's mutant features, Glader grunted in agreement before abruptly backflapping in front of the citadel's massive gate as Saphira did the same. It was an ugly thing, made of 2 giant black doors that met at a point far above either Glader's or Saphira's head. All over its solid iron surface, hundreds if not thousands of spiked rivets, each the size of Eragon's head, menacingly studded out, a warning to all who dared to have ill intentions against its owner. After staring up at the entrance for a second, Eragon and the elves all hopped off while Arya bounded towards the sally port set within the left-hand door. As she neared the nearly invisible entrance, a horizontal piece of metal perhaps 3 fingers wide sank inward half an inch before sliding to the side with a rusty scrape, a pair of owlish eyes peering out from the dark depths. "Who are you, then?" demanded a haughty voice. "State your business or be gone." Kvert. Shing. Following her cry, a beam of silver light flashed as Arya, without warning, slashed out at the no doubt enchanted door with Eilinger before smoothly resheathing it within a fraction of a second. Had it been any other blade, including both Eragon's Breezinger and Nirnan the Dothdaird, such an action would have been useless. Even foolish as doing so would consume a vast amount of energy if not potentially trigger wards and spells that could immediately turn the attacker to ash. But no such thing happened. As the others gathered behind her, the 2 halves of the door suddenly tumbled to the floor with a ringing bang. And as for the gatekeeper behind it, all he could do before following the fate of his destroyed post was look down in horror, eyes wide with terror and utter disbelief as his intestines and other internal organs splattered into a growing pool of crimson blood and gore. Though brutal, none of the others spared a second glance at the dead man, instead choosing to carefully watch as Arya unhesitatingly marched towards the bisected corpse after unsealing the Nirnan. This was the moment of truth. If she was able to cross safely, then it would indicate Galbatorix had no defenses against the Dothdaird, at least here. Eragon held his breath. Though he knew better than most how strong she was now and that the Dothdaird should protect her from most magic, he still worried there might still be some arcane spell Galbatorix cast that could bypass even the spear's protection. And if the king did? If Arya were to die here, I can't even begin to imagine what Naruto would do. He shuddered upon thinking what an enraged Naruto would be like. Just the form his mentor showed on the plateau of the burning plains was more than enough to alter the landscape, and he knew that was far, far from the limit Naruto was able to do. And he wasn't even all that angry. In that case, just make sure we all make it out alive, little one. Saphira nudged her rider forwards, baring her teeth in amusement at his mental complaints of her making too light of the situation. But inwardly, she too held a measure of worry as she watched the elf step through the citadel's entrance, before sighing in relief when nothing seemed to happen as Arya stepped over the body and into the castle. "Do you feel anything?" Eragon called out from outside. She shook her head while tossing over the elven spear. "As long as we stay clear of the gate, we should be fine." Catching it, Eragon held the weapon out, shaft first, to Oromiz and the elves to hold, even with its great length, other than the blade. The entire weapon was covered by a medley of hands, gloves, and gauntlets as they made their way to Arya. Just as they were about to pass by the cleaved body, a group of 20 soldiers in heavy plate armor and pikes outstretched rushed out from the side rooms, their faces hidden behind helms of steel. Unruffled by their sudden appearance, Arya calmly unsheathed Eilinger before blurring away from view, much to the confusion of the soldiers. Circling about, they searched for the missing elf. "Hey! Where did she go? Did you see her? What the hell, huh?" One of the men with muddy brown eyes and hair shouted out, shifting his gaze side to side as he scanned for Arya, his unsteady breathing loud within the enclosed confines of his helmet. He and his fellow soldiers were veterans of 100 battles, the elite of the elite. They had fought and survived everything from the stoutest of dwarves, the most cunning of men, the monstrous Kull, and even had the unfortunate or fortunate chance to witness one of the legendary elves in his prime. So he knew better than to underestimate an elf, no matter beautiful or delicate this one looked. Yet nothing could have prepared them for her, none had the speed to literally vanish from their sight without the aid of magic and remain unseen no matter how they turned about. Any such magic should have failed the instant she entered the citadel. And for her to remain hidden, there was nothing more terrifying than to be unable to see someone capable of ending their lives with a single swing of her sword. So it was only when he heard a faint coughing sound to his right that he managed to witness his comrades collapse to the ground with their throats neatly slit, gurgling and choking on their own blood, yet no sign of the elf. It was as if the Reaper of Death had personally ascended to the mortal realm. And she, found them wanting. Snick. There was no pain when his turn came, only a steely slither as the sword of the first rider effortlessly pierced through both mail and flesh alike. Suddenly, he couldn't seem to breathe. Reaching up towards his throat, his gauntlet hand came back red and slick with his blood. Oh! The pike, once so light in his hand, now felt like a mountain dragging him down as it fell clattering to the stone floor. Slowly, he too sank to the floor onto his knees, his strength ebbing away. There was fear of course, and anger at being so easily bested. But as the light began to disappear from his eyes and the world started to blur, there was only thing left in his mind. A wish. A wish to see the face of his killer, the woman who had so easily breezed through him and his men. For he who had lived his entire life dedicated to the art of combat and killing, there was no greater desire than to see the one who had finally ended him. There was no hatred, for what use would he have for hatred now that he could barely feel his body? And so, with the last of what remained of his strength, he struggled to tilt his head upward, squinting into the blinding light that illuminated the exquisite woman before him. Even had his throat not been cut, he still would have found himself breathless at the sight. Glowing cyan eyes, laced with delicate strands of molten gold in the form of some exotic flower that his fading mind could no longer name, set in a face that could not possibly belong to any mortal being stared back into his own, her unblemished sword pointed downward at her side. With his befuddled mind, it was as if an angel had descended from above to receive him. "Ah, there you are." His wish granted, the nameless man finally slumped to the cold ground as he wheezed his last breath. Opposite of him, Arya numbly looked down at the crimson-garbed soldier while feeling a sense of exhaustion and melancholy spread from her core. It was only now, when they were so close to the end, that she began to reminisce the events of her life and things she had done without a second thought. Ever since she had stepped foot outside of Elesmera, ever since she had defied the words of her mother, she had been involved with the war in some way or another. From killing, being tortured, and plundering mines for information, one ruthless act after another, she had done and experienced more what than most elves did their entire lifetime. The blood and shattered minds of hundreds if not thousands rested in her fair palms. And though she still loved to fight and the feeling of improving herself, such a weight was beginning to weigh her down to the point that despite her near-eidetic memory, she had trouble remembering a time when she hadn't been burned by the flames of war. And now, as the pool of blood of 20 men reached her feet and the rest of her party gathered around her, Arya glanced away to the stainless surface of Eilinger, the blade pulsing with a soft inner light unseen in any other sword. For a second, an urge to throw the priceless blade away almost overwhelmed her, its purity painfully reminded her of the one she once held all those decades ago, now lost forever in the river of time. Such a blade deserved someone equally pure, someone capable of looking past the hatred of an entire species like the first Eragon did. And that wasn't her. Very clean. You have improved much since you left Elesmera, Arya Svitkona. Stepping forth, Oromiz praised the swift and efficient way the daughter of Islanzadi dispatched the soldiers. While taking care of such a meager few was nothing special, slicing only the throats at a speed that defied the physical limits of any elf when she could have easily killed them in a more messy manner was something to respect and admire. Thank you, Oromi Zelda. Arya dipped her head in return, swiftly resheathing her blade while the twin doors creaked open as Blodgarm and another elf opened them from the rooms on either side of the gate. Any praise from one as wise and venerated as Oromiz would have normally left any of the younger generation of elves secretly delighted. Yet, as Gladra and Saphira made their way through one at a time with the Dothdaird, all Arya could feel was a faint contempt at her ability to kill being commended. Enough of this, there will be time to dwell on this after killing Galbatorix. Besides, I would never hear the end of it from Naruto if he caught me brooding. Arya quickly brushed off her uncharacteristic self-pity while lifting her arms, Tensigan aglow. Behind her, the small party including the Saphira and Glada briefly gasped in surprise when they began to hover several inches in the air. Though they had planned for this, it was still a new sensation for all of them, to float without the use of energy or movement. Soon, they began to move forward. There are many traps ahead of us, but as expected, almost all of them only activate upon contact with the ground. For now, we will go according to plan. Eragon had no complaints of the plan. It would not do to use their trump card so early, especially when Galbatorix was undoubtedly watching them. And though the Mad King was notoriously paranoid, there were very few beings able to levitate both themselves and giant beasts such as dragons for any sort of distance, certainly not for a quarter mile. Waving a hand, the heavy gates leading into the citadel slammed shut with an ominous bang. As they did so, Arya glimpsed through them towards the raging battle just in time to catch a series of ghostly green flashes. Though Ciri's affection towards her man somewhat irritated her, she didn't wish any ill upon their young guest. Indeed, if wasn't because of her desire, they probably would have been friends instead of the somewhat close acquaintances they were. Let this battle swiftly end without anything unexpected. Stay safe, everyone. With a quick prayer, though she didn't believe in religion other than the log, Arya refocused her attention upon the empty hallway, especially on those nasty-looking guillotine blades. Oi, Lil White. Don't stray so far from us. It had been hardly half a minute since their crash landing when Naruto noticed that Ciri, who had done her best to try and squeeze the air from his lungs, had disappeared from his back. Channeling wind chakra through Kubikurabocho, he effortlessly sliced through several crimson-garbed men who had managed to make their way past Azura as the dazed dragon shook the stars from his armored head. When Ciri either ignored or didn't hear him, Naruto quietly cursed. Damn it, was I once this much of a pain in the ass? If so, sorry about that, Kakashi-sensei. Below him, Azura rumbled with laughter at his rider's dismay as he slapped a soldier with a spear into the city wall, instantly turning the poor man into a bloody paste. From what I've seen, you were far worse, or did you forget how you almost killed yourself while trying to bleed out the poison? Just as he opened his jaws to unleash a fiery hellstorm, a hard thwack on the crown of his head forced his gaping mouth shut. Hey, no fire, remember? Or did you want to set the entire city on fire? And to be fair, I was only 13. Naruto scolded, wrapping one of Azura's giant horns. Azura rolled his eyes. Fine, no fire. His spiked tail swept a platoon of soldiers high up into the air while gruesomely impaling some. But you should catch up with the little human, she's getting away. Glancing to his right, Naruto witnessed Ciri flash past a half a dozen men in a series of blinding flashes as they fell like dominoes, each with a thrust to the neck or face. Well, it seems Arya's teaching was not for nothing. Though, out of the corner of his eye, he saw several crossbowmen aim at both his young charge and him. Cocking his hand back, Naruto suddenly threw the giant sword, the blade becoming a giant spinning pinwheel of death as it cleaved through all but one of them. It would seem I still have to work on her danger instinct, ho ho ho. About 30 feet away, Ciri briefly paused as a small shudder of horror racked her lithe frame. However, before she could think much of it, a descending sword quickly reclaimed her attention. But when the soldier didn't bat an eye at his comrade's death and instead proceeded to press down on the trigger, the blonde frowned. Something's wrong. Using magnet release, Naruto calmly redirected the bolt after it flew several feet to casually punch through its owner's stomach at several times its initial speed. Such a wound should have instantly killed him, whether he be a regular human or shinobi. Yet as Naruto was about to make his way toward Siri, a faint laugh echoed out from behind him. Fiercely turning back, he watched in silent disgust as the laughing soldier attempted to climb to his feet despite his perforated stomach and spine. So these are the laughing dead Eragon mentioned. Disgust morphed into pity in his ringed eyes as he stared at the dying man with the Rinne Sharingan, observing the spells that turned off his sense of pain and drove him to fight until the end. Only madmen like Galbatorix or Orochimaru would do something as monstrous as this. Closing his eyes, he pulled on the giant blade firmly lodged in the wall, making it decapitate the ruined man before it smacked into his open hand. Damn it, everything was so much simpler without all these fancy, pain-in-the-ass spells. He almost missed the time when the most complicated thing he had to deal with was coming to terms with a 100-meter-tall demon fox in his belly. As it was, there was almost nothing he could do, even with the knowledge of the name of names. Yes, he could disable the spells taking away their sense of pain, but as for those that forced them to fight until either they or their master died, those were constructed using the name of the ancient language. And despite his overwhelming power, he was no seer. Even he didn't know what would happen if he carelessly poked around with a spell with that name. And even if I were able to disable all the spells, it still wouldn't stop all this. In their eyes, I'm just a foreigner and the destroyer of the second largest city. Who would listen? Though he had brought peace to the elemental nations, this was Alagaezia, a continent that had been at war for well over half a century and drenched in the blood of its inhabitants. There were centuries-old grudges as well as these damnable spells that complicated everything. He was a stranger to the land, unable to make either Galbatorix listen or have the Varden stop their campaign. All he could do was minimize the casualties and grant any in his path a swift death. For now, his only goals here were to protect Siri as well as protect the leaders of the Varden. In other words, just another usual day in Naruto Uzumaki's life. Speaking of which, Naruto idly thumbed the handle of the oversized butcher knife while casting a sensory net over the entire city before narrowing his eyes. Ah, there you all are. Just as he expected, there were tens of chakra signatures within the city, with around 24 far more powerful ones scattered about. What worried him however was the number of such energy signatures present in the dark citadel ahead. Though Eragon and Arya in particular had both gotten far stronger than he would have thought possible, it was best to err on the side of caution. Clasping his hands together, Naruto muttered, Mokutan, Moku Bunshin no Jutsu. One became two when his wooden clone detached itself from him before being directed it towards the castle. Keep them safe, but stay out of sight and don't interfere with their fight. Nodding, the double disappeared in a burst of speed. Looking down, Naruto spied the corpses he had bisected earlier weren't actually dead. Sighing, he swung Kobikuribocho to behead them all before jumping down to follow Siri. I hate war. A small distance away from the towering walls of Uryubane, Aji had overlooked the siege of the capital city of the empire. To think this is what he meant by creating a distraction. Unbelievable. The black leader shook his head in near disbelief. Had it been any other pair, he would have long declared them mad and suicidal. But when it came to Naruto, he didn't even try to understand him. Jormungandr. Take your company and flank the city from the left. Take the pressure off as the elves and cult take care of the main gate, then commit your forces to taking down those siege engines. There was almost no point to themselves using catapults, trebuchets, or ballistas as the walls were surely protected from such bombardments. Combined with the wall's sheer height, the effort it would take to even clear Uryubane's defenders and protected machines was far too high, not to mention the potential of harming their own men. Had it not been for the sudden weakness in the wall, they would have been forced to have the elves expend a tremendous amount of energy just to take down the main gate. But with it, the plan changed to simply scaling the walls and taking down the gates from within. Yes sir. Without hesitation, his loyal right-hand man saluted before leaving to join his 20,000 men company. Ajihad sighed, no doubt, by the end of today, at least half of that number won't be coming back, all in the name of freedom from an immortal tyrant. Not long after Azura punched a hole through the walls, the first of many siege ladders and towers arrived at the gap amidst a rain of arrows and javelins. Already, they groaned under the weight of several hundred bodies, with many of them being over 8 feet tall and solid muscle as they streamed over the parapets. But no matter how formidable their race was, they would have been quickly overwhelmed had it not been for the elves back on the ground keeping the ladders steady and their backs protected from all sorts of projectiles. It took less than an hour for the Varden to finally fight their way down to the main gate and the mechanisms holding it in place. But as the colossal gates slowly creaked open, Ajihad could only frown. Something's wrong. That was almost too easy. Even with the gap in their defenses and the power of the elves, the sheer number of men and war machines on top of the walls should have at least held for another hour if not more. Perhaps they were lucky, perhaps he had overestimated the strength of Galbatorix's forces. But right now, the instincts that helped him overcome Durza the Shade as a mere human all those years ago were now screaming at him that this was a trap, and a most deadly one if not handled carefully. Even as another Urgle fell from the wall, Ajihad furrowed his brows while sifting through for possible solutions for several minutes. But nothing came to mind. There was simply no time to think or implement another plan. Sometimes, all we can do, is pray for the best. Ajihad grimly thought while mounting onto a white courser. Into the belly of the beast it is then. Drawing his sword, he nodded at King Hrothgar who stood at the head of thousands of dwarves, all armed to the teeth before looking out over a sea of faces composed of men, dwarves, elves, Urgles, and were-cats. Others may have shouted out a grand speech, to get their comrades' blood pumping and bolster their courage. But after seeing a dragon, their dragon, bust through the city's defenses, well, there simply wasn't anything else he could say that could rouse their spirits any more than they already were. Besides, the time for speeches was over. All that was left was for their swords and magic to do the talking. Men, charge! Like a roaring flood, the earth shook as a combined host of Allegezia species rumbled their way towards the open entrance to Yorubain. Flashes of light snapped and crackled as the elves and spellcasters protected their allies from the incoming wave of projectiles. But they weren't infallible. More than a few fell by either arrow or stone. But the vast majority managed to rush into the capital unharmed, if a little winded from the sprint in full armor. Charging ahead, Ajihad bashed his way through several disorganized lines of men, lacerating any in his path while ignoring any pikes and spears flying towards him. He trusted the wards his spellweavers wove about him. That's what magic was for. As he cleaved a crimson soldier's arm from his shoulder, everything seemed to be going well. But when turned to his other side, he suddenly felt a violent tug on his midsection. What the? Out of pure instinct, he stabbed out behind him, a move that was certain to either pierce through his assailant's vital organs, or force him to let go through sheer force alone. As it turned out, the former happened as felt his sword slice past armor into vulnerable flesh below, but it did nothing as he was forcefully pulled off his horse. Then he heard the laughing. Ah shit, laughing dead. Ajihad shouted in warning when he realized who it was that had dragged him to the ground. All around him, he recognized the men he had battered and slashed aside on his initial charge as they swarmed him, some with broken arms and legs and even one bits of his ribs poking out from his armor, all the while mockingly laughing at him and his useless attempts to escape. Then they started slashing. Once, twice, thrice, he quickly lost count of the number of blows that rained down, though his wards continued to hold out. But for how much longer? Each one drained precious energy reserves from both him and his magic users who even now strained to protect the other men, and eventually, they would run out. But even with his formidable strength, in the end, he was but a normal human held down by others who feared neither pain nor death. Soon, just as he feared, the edges of his vision began to blacken as his wards continued to draw on his strength. Well, this isn't good. Across the entrance on top of a roof, a pair of dead ringed eyes rimmed by a shaggy mane of silver hair peered out over the chaos of blood, meat, and bone, in particular at a throng of maroon soldiers who were currently wailing away at his ward in the center. But just as one of his fingers twitched, he spied a certain cult furiously making his way down the ramparts towards the ground below. Relaxing, the watcher behind the eyes drew his attention elsewhere. Just as his wards were about to fail, a giant war club bashed away the soldiers on top of him. Shaking the blackness away, he blinked and a gray hand as big as his head filled his vision. Gah! Get up, Night Stalker! This is no time to sleep. A mighty shout that could be heard over the din of battle rang in his ears as Enar Garshvag, war chief of the Urgles, reveled in the bloodshed and glory he was gaining for his tribes, all the while bashing in any skulls within reach of his club. Grasping Cole's hand, or rather several of his fingers, Ajihad felt a small amount of vertigo as he felt himself swiftly pulled back onto his feet. Blinking away the blurriness from his eyes, he hurriedly intercepted a thrust at both their sides. "Thank you, Nar Garshvog, for your timely rescue. Your assistance is most appreciated," Ajihad shouted while standing back to back with the 8.5 feet Cole, something not many would dare to do as it was easy for them to kill someone without meaning to, such as accidentally crushing a soldier between his leg and the side of a building and not even notice. Then again, he wasn't some average soldier, he was the man who managed to scar Durza the Shade Sword as well as best him in single combat. What happened earlier wouldn't happen again. Ha ha ha. I'm glad you survived, Night Stalker. There is much glory to be had this day. Nar Garshvog roared back as he casually popped the last soldier's head, both helmet and skull, with his bare hand. The others had long died or run away deeper into the city. Then a crafty gleam entered his yellow eyes. Of course, this means you'll grant more land after all is all over, correct? The corner of his mouth twitched in exasperation and amusement. Though I cannot speak for my fellow leaders, I can tell you that I will make sure you get as much land as we can afford, as long you keep up that part of the bargain. The Urgal warchief snorted helplessly in response. Bah, it's not that I don't want to, but you know our race is not a peaceful one. You know of our traditions. Such practices are carved into our very flesh and bone. If we asked, would you have your men give up farming, or the dwarves stop mining for gold and gems, or the elves to stop caring for the trees if it were for the sake of peace? The middle of Ajihad's brows creased. Other than planning for the final assault, this had been the issue that concerned him most. Just how was he going to pacify the Urgals without resorting to genocide? If I wasn't able to come up with a solution in the peace of my tent, I certainly won't in the middle of battle. Patting his savior's arm, Ajihad shook his head before remounting his horse. We'll discuss this later. For now, let's capture the city. Nar Garshvog grunted at the Black Commander's words. He hadn't expected much else. But as he was about to lead his Urgals further in, Ajihad called out a warning. Be careful, Nar Garshvog. There is something strange about this campaign, it's been far too easy thus far. And beware, we still haven't encountered anyone with the heart of hearts. No doubt they wait further within. With that, he gestured towards his men to continue on before following them, the Urgals hot on his heels. 150, 180, or was that 190th one? Maybe even the 200th. I've lost track, haven't I? Ciri panted as she flashed behind another soldier to behead him with her trusty Gwhyr sword, Ziriel. She had learned around her 50th one, after a soldier almost crippled her knee despite stabbing him through the heart, that only a thrust into the brain or a good beheading could permanently keep these guys down. Yah! Feeling her blade make its way through the spine, Ciri began to stumble forward with its momentum, her feet tripping over themselves as her legs gave out. But before she could face plant into the headless corpse of the man she just killed, a strong hand gripped her shoulder to steady her. Her nerves still high-strung and fighting instincts very much active, she ducked away from the touch before forcing herself to spin about to gut the offender, only to widen her eyes in astonishment when she saw that same hand easily catch the razor-sharp blade. Looking up, a pair of warm cerulean orbs peered into her own. Whoa, calm yourself, Lil White. It's me, Naruto. Rest for a bit, there aren't any soldiers or spellcasters nearby, for now. Hearing his words comforted her more than resting by a campfire in the middle of a winter night. Then came the weakness that stemmed from her very blood spirit. Though she could pass through space and time, to worlds upon worlds and not get too exhausted, performing so many leaps as well as fighting it out with men who felt no pain or feared death and could only die from a head-wound drained Ciri like never before. Just the sheer number alone was enough to give her a headache. Naruto. Stabbing her blade into the ground, Ciri struggled to stand up, her muscles screaming to just lay down and rest, no matter the blood and filth that stained it. Just as her legs were about to give out for the second time, Naruto smoothly leaned down to loop her arm around his shoulders while placing a hand about her thin waist. Yup, it's the one and only Naruto Uzumaki. So stop trying to kill me. Knowing she was safe with him around, Ciri rolled her eyes at his ridiculous words as she leaned against his side until she felt her back touch a wall. Slumping to the ground, she ruefully muttered, "PHHT, as if I could." Naruto chuckled when he saw his student roll her eyes. eyeing the shallow cuts of the ones lucky enough to even touch her. His hands glowed viridian as he closed the open wounds within seconds. Soon, all that was left was unblemished fair skin, though her clothes remained ripped in those places. Now that I think about it, I probably should have insisted she wear something more protective than a simple cotton shirt and pair of leather pants. The blonde mused as he tracked the movements of the Eldenari holders, wondering why only half of them began to move towards the encroaching Varden while the others remained at their original posts. Just what are they be waiting for? As he pondered about their intentions, Ciri wheezed as she regained her breath, the elder blood within her regenerating her stamina at a quicker pace than any normal human. Though still tired, her fighting spirit still raged within her. Never before had she felt so powerful or fast than she was now, and it was intoxicating, no matter the death and carnage that surrounded them. Every cell of her body itched to get back into the fight, though staying in Naruto's embrace was rather tempting. You know, you've improved quite a bit, Ciri, especially the delay between your jumps and attacks. Other than Arya and me, there's not many on this continent capable of reacting to your attacks, even fewer when you use your elder blood. Naruto praised while roughly musing Ciri's hair, ignoring how she tried to bat his hand away. I take back what I said, get off me. However, her silent plea went unanswered. Like he would to a child, Naruto continued to play around with her, much to her utter embarrassment, for several more seconds before mercifully letting her go. Standing up, he held out a hand to her. Come on Cirithe, up you go, or are you too tired already? Although she knew what Naruto was doing, Ciri still couldn't help but feel a bit riled up at his challenging tone. Oh hell no. Swiftly rising back to her feet, she proceeded to vanish before reappearing several meters away in a flash of green. Come on old man, keep up. Or is your age getting to you? Shouting out her own challenge, the woman from another world disappeared from sight as she fell upon another company of soldiers, much to Naruto's amusement. Ha ha ha. You're a century too young to ask me that question, Lil White. Drawing a pair of Hiraition kunai, Kobikurabocho was far too big in these narrow streets. Naruto bounded after his charge in a blur of gold and orange, his pure speed as great as Ciri's teleports. Unknown to them at the time, the heavy usage of her powers in reality drew the attention of others, the gears of fate quietly turning about. Off on another world under the light of the full moon, a wraith-like figure Shadow donned in fine armor with a staff lying on his lap silently meditated, a luminous magical circle around him with him in its center. Mystical words flowed past his lips as he quietly meditated, his face hidden by a forbidding metal mask. Not a mile away, a great host of horses and steel-clad riders milled about, their movements oddly mechanical and rigid. For days Caranther, the golden child and navigator of the wild hunt, ceaselessly searched for a path into the world Cirilla fled to, only stopping for food and rest every so often. Of all the Ainel, he had the strongest affinity to time and space, only surpassed by the traitor Avalakh and, as much as he hated to admit it, that accursed half-breed Dhoin Ziriel. But despite his gifts, no matter how arcane his spells or increasingly ingenious his methods were, it was of no use. In the end, he simply didn't have enough power. As the magic circle around him fractured into 1,000 pieces, again, Caranther sighed in frustration. Another failure, power, is this what it comes down to in the end? Dark thoughts clouded his mind. Is this why you abandoned your race, betrayed our king, and left me, for that ugly thing? Hot rage over his foster father's betrayal coursed through him as he gripped his steel staff, almost denting the sturdy metal. Then something happened. What's this? Cracking open his eyes, the navigator discovered the once impenetrable veil about that world now had several fine cracks running across its surface. They were infinitesimally small, like the short coarse hairs compared to an entire horse. But they were there. And where there was weakness, there is a way. A grim smile etched across his face when he realized what exactly was the cause of them. Foolish swallow, if only you had suppressed your powers, you would have been safe. What is it, Caranther? Have you found a way into that world? Behind him, a towering figure in skeletal armor made his way to the sitting mage, heavy clanks ringing about. Caranther immediately made his way to his knees. Yes, my king, I have, and by Ziriel's doing in fact. However, we must make haste, otherwise the way there might forever be closed to us. Nodding, Eragon quickly gestured for Imlerith to ready the others while the two saddled themselves on their steeds. Soon, the barks and neighs of over 1,000 horses and hounds rang through the air as the wild hunt assembled with Caranther, Imlerith, and the king of the wild hunt at their head. Then, with a slam of his staff, Caranther opened an icy blue tear the size of a small tree. In front, Eragon slowly drew his sword before jabbing it forward. Come, it's time for a hunt. On other side of Allegezia and away from all the fighting, another elf peacefully rested on a bed that seamlessly rested on the wooden floor within a tree. Ever since his abrupt appearance in Allegezia, the stranger never opened his eyes, only occasionally stirring about as dreams or nightmares only known to him disturbed his slumber. Then, by some unknown signal, his deep-set aquamarine eyes abruptly snapped open along with a sharp intake of air. Cirilla. Chapter 69, Battle of Urbane, Part 2. While the Varden was having the Battle of an Era, Arya was making sure she and the rest of her party made it through the trap-infested hallway in one piece. Behind them laid smoking remains of several spells and traps of increasing deadliness that still triggered despite them floating down the long corridor. Because they wanted to conserve as much energy as possible while revealing as few trump cards as possible, what should have taken mere minutes or even seconds turned into a nearly hour-long ordeal. Next to Saphira, Eragon watched Arya disable yet another protective ward that would have caused something to plummet from the ceiling upon any disturbance in the air. After the ward was undone, a well-concealed panel slowly lowered, revealing dozens of crystalline spikes that glowed a deep, ominous purple. Although he didn't recognize the material or spells on the spikes, he had no doubt they were meant to be fatal, and gruesomely so. To think Galbatorix was paranoid enough to ward the air itself, and with such deadly spells. Had it not been for you and Naruto's training, I have no doubt we would be nothing more than ashes in the wind. Then he frowned. But wasn't his goal to capture Saphira, alive and whole, and breed a new generation of dragon riders? Why are all the spells designed to kill rather than incapacitate? Though he trusted his queen's daughter and her power, Bloodgarm continued to cautiously peer at the walls and floor with his amber eyes, his muscles tight and ready for action. Turning to Eragon, he grimly answered, perhaps he thought we would already be captured by the less fatal pits near the entrance. Or maybe he knows we were taught by the only man who utterly destroyed him at the height of his power, Naruto, and thus doesn't know what we can do. And that frightens him. A clear voice rang out from the front as Arya put in her 2 cents. Oromiz nodded his head with a contemplative hum. Arya Svitkona is correct. Although one of Galbatorix's greatest desires is to create an army of dragon riders who answers only to him, his own safety and absolute power comes first. Even if it means killing off the one known method of bringing back the dragons and the riders, as long it's a threat, he'll do it in a heartbeat. A flash of understanding lit up in Eragon's eyes at Arya's and Oromiz's words. It made sense, in a twisted way. If you had a weapon you couldn't control, it was better to destroy it. That didn't mean it made him feel any better. Humph, we didn't expect any mercy from the Eggbreaker anyways, little one, only victory, or death. Saphira disdainfully snorted at the very thought of being at the mercy of the man who almost exterminated her race. Beside her, Glade rumbled his agreement. He would sooner have his wings torn off and Eldenari shattered before willingly serve the Mad King. And although they spoke no words, both of their riders agreed. Only victory, or death. Walking past the deactivated trap, they made their way to a mere 100 feet from the golden doors when Arya halted them. This was nothing new as she had stopped their progress multiple times through their route to consult with them the best way of bypassing the deadly spells. But this time, something was different. What's wrong, Arya? Did some, just as Eragon began to question his companion, a group of 20 black-robed humans, men and women alike, filed out of a side passageway and formed a line ahead of them, blocking the way, the words of the ancient language on the tips of their tongues. Frowning, he felt a blade of thought stab into his mind, and as he glanced around, the young rider saw similar expressions on most of his comrades' faces. Normally no human spellcaster could possibly match an L4 rider in either mind or body. But these men and women cared nothing about any damage done to them, or if they died, as they abandoned any form of defense in favor of a frightening offense. Roaring, Saphira and Glade unleashed a torrent of sapphire and golden flames, their fiery rage bathing the decadent hallway and their attackers. But compared to the smoldering remains of the hanging banners and molten gold, the spellcasters remained unfazed, their wards forcing the flames to pass by them harmlessly. Instead, it merely made them mutter even faster, their words merging into a near incoherent babble as the air became charged with chakra. Enough of this. With a casual flick of her mind, Arya, one of only 3 unaffected by the surprise assault, directly crushed the mind of her attacker before stomping on the floor in front of her. What came next shocked Eragon and the others. Instantly, a horizontal piece of lusterless metal, 30 feet long and 4 inches thick, shot out of each wall with a terrible screech. The plates of metal caught the magicians between them and severed them in two, like a giant pair of snips, then just as quickly retreated back into their hidden slots. Silence, along with the fresh smell of blood and guts, filled the air. What a horrible way to die. Although they were on opposite sides, the sheer brutality and suddenness of their deaths sickened Eragon. It wasn't every day you saw a group of people capable of controlling others and, to a limited extent, warp reality get scissored in half in the blink of an eye. But how should we get past this? The trap seems to activate around waist level. While Arya and I could just run on the walls, the others can't. So, Arya, could you fly us over the blades? Eragon tapped the pommel of Breezinger as he considered his options before settling on the simplest one. But to his disappointment, Arya lightly shook her head, the corners of her mouth pointed down in slight frustration. No, there are many more sets of similar blades going all the way up to the ceiling, and all of them will activate the moment we go above a certain level. Unfortunately, with Saphira's and Gladrelda's height, it is inevitable they will trigger. But that's not the greatest of our concerns. The blades themselves are protected by that word, so unless we reveal one of our secrets, there is no method to disable them through the ancient language, in a short time at least. With her words, Eragon and the elves grew quiet as they pondered on what to do. Every single trump card they possessed was incomparably precious against an incomparably sly opponent like Galbatorix. To use even one of them was to lower their already moderate chance of victory by a substantial amount. Even Oromiz, the most experienced of them all, couldn't come up with a suitable solution in such a short time. Perhaps if they had another hour or so, he could find a way around the problem. But there simply wasn't any time left. With the assault on Yoryubain underway, every second mattered, and even with Naruto ensuring none of the Varden leadership died, it would be a Pyrrhic victory at best for both sides if they took too long. While Arya listened to Umaroth argue against the use of a teleportation spell, her lips pursed together into a thin line as her eyes began to emit a brilliant radiance. Then there's only one choice left. I didn't want to reveal it this early, but there's no other way. Casting a last glance at the hidden blades once more, she pivoted to face the others. While you all make your way down the hallway, I will hold off the blades. For a moment, it looked as if Eragon wanted to argue. However, in the end, he merely nodded his support. There was no use in quarreling now. Seeing nobody try to dissuade her, Arya flexed her hands as chakra began to surge through her. Very well, get ready to run. The dragons and the elves tensed, their muscles tight with anticipation as they knelt close to the ground. Not even Eragon knew to what extent Arya could hold out for without draining too much of her reserves. All they could do was sprint out as fast as they could to reduce her burden. Go! Stepping forward, Arya sprang the trap, her brows scrunched in concentration as she prevented over 400 tons of enchanted steel from slicing both her and her friends to bits. Had it been just steel, she wouldn't have any problem with holding the heavy blades back for several hours, never mind a few seconds. But she wasn't Naruto. The name of names still affected her enough that already she could feel the minor drain on her massive chakra reserves from holding them back. A jarring crash sounded from each wall as threads of dust fell from the ceiling, blossoming into hazy plumes. As silent as shadows, Eragon and the elves darted down the hall, the two dragons bounding forth with their heads and tails low. Though it took them only a few seconds to cross the deadly gap, on every step of the way, they could feel the threatening pressure exuded by the rattling sheets of metal as they fought against their imprisonment. If Arya faltered for even a second, it wouldn't matter who it was, be it dragon or elf, all would suffer the same gruesome deaths as their deceased enemies. Once they were all past the deadly contraption and corpses, Eragon shouted out, "All right, we're across. You can let go now." Noticing they were no longer in danger, Arya slowly exhaled before abruptly redirecting her chakra throughout her body. Her fingers locked in a one-handed tiger hand seal as she flickered from existence, her form nearly invisible as she shunshined behind the waiting group. Clang! Arya Svitkona/Drottningu. Alarmed shouts arose from the elves when their queen's daughter disappeared from view, the bloody blades mercilessly hacking where she once stood. Only the dragons and their dragon riders appeared unconcerned for her safety, a smirk on their faces. Finally, it was Blodgarm who first noticed the sound of an additional person breathing behind them. Gesturing towards the 10 spellcasters, they turned to the scene of Arya, Eragon, and Saphira shooting amused looks at their elders. Shall we continue? There are no more obstacles between here and the doors except for one, but as long we hold the Dothert, no harm should come to us. Waving her hand, Nirnan was once again unsealed as she made her way towards the end of the hallway. It was Oromiz and Glader who first moved, with Blodgarm and his spellweavers a close second. Although questions raced through all their minds, from what her new eyes could do to how she could possibly move so fast that she vanished from their combined sight, none of that was important right now. So what if she could move far beyond the speed of sound, or if she hold back tons of metal designed to cut through any enchantments? Her loyalty to her race and the good of Allegezia was never in doubt, not even when she fell in love with some foreigner nobody knew. And so they would shelve their innate curiosity, for now. Without the threat of any more traps or wards, they quickly made their way to the golden doors. Towering over them all, over even Saphira and Glade who stood more than 60 feet from the ground, Eragon looked up at the shining expanse of gold. Embossed across their surface was a life-sized oak tree, the leaves of which formed an arching canopy that joined with the roots below to inscribe a great circle about the trunk. Sprouting from either side of the trunk's midsection were 2 thick bundles of branches, which divided the space within the circle into quarters. In the top left quarter was a carving of an army of spear-bearing elves marching through a thick forest. In the top right quarter were humans building castles and forging swords. In the bottom left, Urgles, Kull, mostly, burning down a village and killing the inhabitants. In the bottom right, dwarves mining caves filled with gems and veins of ore. Amid the roots and branches of the oak, Eragon spotted wercats and the Arazak, as well as a few small strange-looking creatures that he failed to recognize. And coiled in the very center of the bole of the tree was a dragon that held the end of its tail in its mouth, as if biting itself. The doors were beautifully crafted. Under different circumstances, he would have been content to sit and study them for most of a day. Instead, all he could feel as he stared at the shining door was dread as he contemplated the events that led Saphira and him here, and what still laid ahead. Like what would happen after killing Galbatorix? Would Allegezia truly become a better place under the Varden's leadership? How should the Dragon Rider Order exist and function from now on? Should it even exist? Countless questions without definite answers circled his mind, questions that would probably trouble him till the end of his days. Then, before his doubts could deepen, a wave of warmth washed over his being. Widening his eyes, Eragon recognized the energy signature flowing through his chakra pathways to be the same one he felt on the plateau of the Burning Plains. A small smile played at the corner of his mouth as he thought back to Naruto's parting words. But if you don't believe in yourself, look around you. Saphira, Oromiz, Glader, Blodgarm, Arya, Azura, Ajihad, Islanzadi, Hrothgar, me. And even those 2 assholes Grimr and Orin are all here with you. You do not stand alone in this fight. I am not alone in this fight. Turning around, Eragon stared at the glimmering sapphire dragon. Hey! Blinking her big blue eyes, Saphira turned away from the gleaming doors to her rider. What is it, Eragon? Walking forward, he surprised her by suddenly laying his head against her leathery snout, his hands on both sides of her jaws and eyes misty with memories. No matter how large she grew or how terrifying she was to ordinary men and women, he would forever remember the days when he could hold the over 100-foot-long dragon in the palm of his hand, a time when his greatest worry was getting found out by his uncle and cousin. I love you, Saphira. Tilting her head in mild surprise, Saphira closed her eyes as she gently nuzzled into her other half's embrace. I love you too, little one. For a moment, they stood like that, man and dragon, their breaths and heartbeats perfectly synchronized as they took solace in each other's minds. Taking a deep breath, Eragon pulled away, his hazy eyes now sharp and focused for the fight ahead. Are you ready, Eragon Finerial? Oromiz serenely gazed at his pupil, a pale hand on the Doththairt's shaft. Behind them, the elven spellweavers were arranged about the weapon, each laying a hand on it. No. But we are as ready as we ever will be. The corners of the aged elf's eyes crinkled in approval at the younger rider's honest response. False bravado was the first step to failure, a step many humans and younger elves tended to stumble on, and one they couldn't afford right now. Drawing Nagling, Oromiz watched as Eragon reached out to a handle set within the left-hand door and pulled. Beside him, Arya held Eilingr, sword of the first Eragon and the last head of the Dragon Rider Order Vrail, its pure white blade radiating the slight brilliance of a star. But as he did, a column of shimmering air abruptly materialized around Blodgarm and each of his 10 spellcasters. However, upon coming within several inches of them, a faint cyan barrier originating from Nirnan crackled to life. The eerie green nimbus about its barbed spearhead brighter than ever as its ancient spells fought against whatever final trap Galbatorix planted. Hurry, we don't know whether Nirnan's wards can hold. Arya quickly ushered the group in as she pulled on the right-hand door, a feat already beyond that of any normal human, to let the much larger dragons through. On the other side of the cavernous archway was a huge, dark chamber. As they filed in, Eragon cautiously looked about, unsure of its size, for the walls lay hidden in velvet shadows. On his right side, Arya also scanned the room, a deep frown etched on her fair face, not liking what she saw. Although the Tensigan could see through all of creation, this room and the rest of those behind the golden archway were like the sun, blinding her because of the numerous countless spells, enchantments, and wards, both protective and auxiliary, that covered every inch of the castle. A line of flameless lanterns mounted on iron poles ran straight out from either side of the entranceway, illuminating the patterned floor and little else, while a faint glow came from above through crystals set within the distant ceiling. The 2 rows of lanterns ended over 500 feet away, near the base of a broad dais, upon which rested a throne. On the throne sat a single black figure, the only visible one in the whole room, and flat on his lap lay a bare sword of dull azure, its blue an even darker shade than that of Breezing. And what Arya saw alarmed her. But before she could warn her comrades, the golden doors swung shut behind them with a foreboding thud. As the echoes faded to dusky silence within the high presence chamber, the figure upon the throne stirred, as if waking from sleep. And then a voice such as Eragon had never heard before, deep and rich and imbued with authority greater than that of Ajihad, Hrothgar, or even Oromiz. A voice that made even the elves seem harsh and discordant, resounded forth from the far side of the throne room. And it said, "Ah, I have been expecting you. Welcome to my humble abode. And welcome to you in particular, Eragon Shadeslayer, and to you, Saphira Brightscales. I have much desire to meet with you. And of course the wisest of all, Oromiz and the magnificent Glader, Blodgarm, son of Ildred the Beautiful, Umaroth, Valdr, and those others who travel with you seen and unseen. I had long believed them to be dead, and I am most glad to learn otherwise." The voice then paused while a near undetectable malicious tone entered. "And you, Arya Drottningu, daughter of Islanzadi, Shadeslayer in your own right, and lover of the mighty god of slaughter, Naruto Uzumaki. Long have I heard tales of your peerless beauty and even greater power, but seeing you now, the rumors truly do not do justice to your exquisite visage and most impressive display." A pair of black orbs flashed as its owner raised his arms. "Welcome, all. We have much to talk about." As the group led by Eragon and Arya made contact with the enemy, a certain ashen-haired lass was currently having her toughest fight yet in the battle. "Huff, why, clang, won't, huff huff, you just die already." A frustrated shout tore out of Ciri's dry throat as she hacked and slashed down at the invisible barrier surrounding a particularly stubborn man. "Ha ha ha. Useless, useless, useless. I don't know what kind of freak you are, but you and your monster friends will all meet your deaths here." The unknown man, human, if Ciri judged him correctly by his rounded ears, if humans were capable of casually batting aside a sword fueled with enough strength to smack down a rampaging rock troll, raucously laughed while taunting her as he tried to goad the flickering woman to overreach, to make a fatal error. For although he held the edge in strength and durability, his augmented speed absolutely paled in comparison to Ciri's. It didn't help that the large bulky Eldenari attached to the side of his hips kept on swaying about and hindering his movements. Near the beginning of the fight, when she was still slightly careless after mowing down hundreds of similar-looking men, he almost lacerated her from hip to shoulder on their second exchange, only for his elbow to knock against the cumbersome object, making him miss by less than an inch. Even now, he could remember the utter shock on her scarred, yet fair face. But, much to his frustration, it proved to be the last time he got close to injuring her as she suddenly started teleporting around him, surrounding his person in a flood of flickering steel and magic. Still, he couldn't very well abandon it, especially when it was the only reason he was able to keep up with the unknown woman. But he was beginning to worry. Though confident he could kill the wench in due time, she already delayed him from his assault on Hrothgar, king of the dwarves. No doubt, his absence has already been noted by his fellow Eldenari bearers who will surely report this to the king after the battle. And that monster didn't forgive failure. Off to the side, a pair of violet-ringed eyes peered from the shadows as Naruto observed how Siri darted around the man, both physically and magically, sparks flying as her sword encountered resistance from both steel and enchanted flesh. He would not help in this fight unless she was in immediate danger, as this was both training and a test wrapped up in one. Would she stay calm and collected even in the face of adversity, or snap under the pressure and recklessly attack her enemy? And who knows, maybe something surprising may come out of it. But there was another problem he had to deal with. The main army of the Varden had finally encountered its respective Eldenari bearer, and it wasn't looking pretty. Although he had already intercepted a few other Eldenari wielders such as the one Siri was dueling, this one was particularly gruesome. Scanning the situation through the eyes of one of his paths, Tobirama, the space between Naruto's golden eyebrows furrowed as he watched the slaughter between a particular General Barst and a number of elves, humans, and Urgals, with the slaughter being on the side of the Varden. When he had seen the first of many elves get thrown into the air like a rag doll from the general's oversized spiked mace, the blonde knew something was wrong. Even with the Eldenari, Barst shouldn't have been able to outright kill or maim an elf with a single blow due to their extensive wards. It was only after he carefully observed the city itself did he grudgingly sigh in admiration. As much as I despise the man, Galbatorix truly is a genius in the art of magic. To think he managed to not only place a barrier capable of subtly changing the nature of spells and wards, yet not outright negate them while keeping his own safe from the effects in such a short time since our fight without me noticing, even after I erased the name of the ancient language from his soul and mind. How cunning. Naruto narrowed his eyes. In a way, he reminds me of a young Sasuke before I reformed him with my fists. But that was neither here nor there. That's because right now two of his wards, Ajihad and Queen Islanzati, had just rode out to meet the general head-on with her elven escort. But despite her formidable power, Naruto knew there could only be one end to the fight. Death. And he couldn't let that happen, especially not Arya's mother. Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. Creating over 20 clones of himself, Naruto continued to monitor Siri's duel while taking control of the paths nearest to the Varden leaders. No one enjoyed surprises during battle, let alone a veteran shinobi. As for the others, go see what the others are up to, something's not right. He'd long noticed that the vast majority of Eldenari holders stayed where they were, not even moving an inch despite the invading army. In fact, only a few, including the one Siri was fighting right now, even bothered to do as Galbatorix ordered from what his clone overheard, though only the man in front of him and General Barst still lived. Poor guys weren't even able to scream before Azura reduced them to nothing with his black flames. Just how unlucky were they to encounter one of the only beings on the continent capable of instantly killing them? Naruto briefly mused before a frown marked his face. But why aren't they all rushing out to exterminate the Varden's leaders? Wasn't that the plan? Unless... Naruto's eyes widened as a dreadful thought wormed its way through his mind, the facts he did no beginning to connect. He knew of my clone. And if that's the case... He cast a worried glance towards the dark citadel. Arya. It was a mess. That was the only word Ajihad could use to describe the disordered situation in the street from atop his steed. The once neat and tidy lines of infantry now mingled together in such a chaotic mix that it was impossible to determine lines or ranks or even where the front of the battle was. Clusters of crimson laid scattered about the main street as the fighting spilled out into the nearby branch passages. But that's not what worried him. Leader of the rebel scum, do you dare to meet me in honest battle? Or are you too craven? Right in the center of the street and blocking the way with a small mountain of broken bodies sat General Barst upon his grey charger. Blood and bits of gore dripping from the head of his giant mace, which was currently pointed his way. It was an ugly thing, composed of a haft almost as thick that of a mature sapling and ending with a dark piece of twisted steel covered in a host of cruel barbed spikes. Its reach alone could rival that of a longsword, its length and size almost comical if not for the steady stream of blood that dripped down its length. However, such idle thoughts quickly evaporated once the general began to casually swing the monstrosity of a weapon about like a baton and single-handedly slaughter hundreds of men and women, no matter their species. Damn it. Ajihad swore under his breath as he watched another salvo of arrows and bolts vanish in puffs of sickly orange flame while swords and spears simply bounced off of him like he were made of stone. Earlier, he had even witnessed a full charge made up of several 8 feet cull fail to budge the man from his horse before they were clobbered to death, their horns and skulls shattered apart like brittle eggshells. It didn't take a genius to figure out what was powering the general's superhuman speed and strength, especially with that giant bulge under his breastplate. Eldenari, and maybe more than one. Although he had expected this kind of encounter sooner or later, it still shocked Ajihad how helpless they were against such a foe. Inwardly, he cursed the man who quoted the strength of an individual was insignificant in comparison to an army. Clearly whoever said this never encountered someone wielding an Eldenari. Shouting out, the leader of the Varden ordered his men to retreat from the senseless bloodbath below. But that was not the worst of the news. If it were just the Eldenari, the numerous elves would have been more than enough to whittle down its energy reserves before going in for the kill with either sword or magic. However, for some reason, the further they penetrated into the city, the more likely magic went awry or simply ceased to work. At first it was something minor, like a simple spell that should have stopped all arrows lasting a second shorter than it should have, or one meant to close lacerations, only working on the surface level. While odd, Ajihad eventually put it out of his mind, attributing it to his spellcaster's mental fatigue as he assigned another, fresh magician to temporarily take his place. But it only grew worse. Barely another 100 feet in, an elf casted a spell on an enemy commander, only for one of the guards by Ajihad's side to suddenly burst up in a conflagration of sickly green. His harrowing screams as he burned to cinders from the inside out still chilled them all to the bone, especially when it could have easily been them. From then on, magic was strictly regulated, or at least until they met the monster of a general. Not that it helped, as no spell, even when properly cast, was able to pierce through Barst's seemingly impregnable wards. Even counting the number of awry spells, at least 100 magical attacks must have impacted him, yet the wards protecting Barst remain as strong as ever. That, or he is impervious to magic itself. Ajihad grimaced when he saw the hopeless expressions on the men's faces while plan after plan, scheme after scheme flickered through his brilliant mind, desperately searching for something, anything that could bring Barst down. But to no avail. Nothing he could think of would be able to take the man out without another mass casualty of lives and time. Except one. By the riders, you better be watching this. Ajihad quietly muttered as he prepared to ride down to meet his foe and possibly his death. What else could he do? Every second delayed meant more men, Urgles, dwarves, and elves needlessly sacrificing their lives now that magic and time wasn't on their side. Still in the middle of the street, General Barst let loose a bloodthirsty smile when he saw his simple, but effective, plan come to fruition. Though he could have easily charged through the ocean of bodies between him and his target, why do so when he could simply kill some and lure the dragon from his den? Effortlessly hefting his weapon of choice over his shoulder, Barst watched as step by step, his prey approached his doom, the men parting like wheat before a scythe. The general chuckled when he saw the one he knew as Jormungandr try to hold his commander back. It didn't work. With but a few terse words, Ajihad pushed aside his second-in-command to continue on before stopping several 100 feet from him, blade drawn. The two circled each other. Lord Barst Berengarson, long have I heard of your great achievements and extraordinary tactics. Won't you surrender now and spare the men under your command? Even with the Eldenari, there is a limit to how much punishment you can take, and you are but one while we are many. Eventually, your wards will fail and you will tire, it is inevitable. A hushed silence swept the street as soldiers on both sides stilled, their ears straining as they waited for the general's response. You have courage, Ajihad, leader of the Varden. I'll give you that. Seeing the look of pure resolution on Ajihad's face, General Barst couldn't help but reluctantly admire the other man's guts despite having shown him his ability to easily overpower many of Alagesia's strongest inhabitants. However, his tone soon changed. However, you are an utter fool to face me alone if you think that. Without magic and wards, you and your precious abominations are worse than useless, so just how do you going to fight me? Even this, god of slaughter, is nothing before me without his vile magic. Barst sneered as he urged his horse forward, its ironclad hooves clattering against the stone pavement. Only to pause when a great shout arose from the Varden when a small group of elves rode out on pure white steeds, Queen Islanzadi in front. But he is not alone. Clad in her lustrous golden armor, her red cape billowing, and a stark white raven on her shoulder, the elf queen looked like a goddess of war and victory none dared to even have the least impure thoughts of. So stark the contrast between her splendid and radiant image amongst a city of smoke and corpses. Queen Islanzadi! Queen Islanzadi! Queen Islanzadi! Wild cheers arose from human, dwarf, and elf alike when they saw the legendary queen of the elves and her guard make their appearance. their swords and spears gleaming as the light reflected off of their mirror sheen. Drawing up to her fellow commander, Islanzadi shot a murderous glare at the butcher of almost 200 of her kind, intensely observing as 2 of her elf guard lowered their spears before driving their horses in a swift gallop, the muscles beneath their glossy hides flexing and relaxing as they raced across the short distance that separated them from the unmoving mountain of man and iron, a disdainful smirk on his brutish face. It's useless. Though the men and women around them loudly cheered, Ajihad and even Islanzadi knew such a charge was utterly meaningless as long as energy remained within the Eldenari. The spears never touched the general. With a loud crack, wood fragments flew and metal screeched as the hafts shattered an arm's length away from him, leaving them with little more than shards of wood in their grasps. Neither of them had much time to mourn the loss of their fabled weapons as with a single swing of his mace, Barst brained the elven horses just as easily he did to the cull, their blood and brains painting their unblemished coats a hideous crimson. Leaping off of their fallen steeds, the 2 elves twisted in the air before nimbly landing on their feet, leaf-shaped blades unsheathed. But just as they were about to dart back towards the general, an imposing voice from behind stopped them. Retreat! Despite being in the middle of a life-or-death situation, both of the elves, without a hint of hesitation, instantly reacted to Islanzadi's command as they smoothly came to a stop and bounded backward with a single, explosive step to once again stand by their queen's side, swords back in their sheaths. With that, the cheers of the Varden grew quiet, a solemn look on each of their faces when they realized that even with the queen of the elder race and her guard, nothing was certain. Ignoring the tense silence as well as the growing clamor on the Empire's side, Islanzadi gravely glanced to the side. Ajihad, I hope, for you and your kind sake, you were not just riding out in a ridiculous attempt of valor. If even the elves who have fought by my side during the fall of the dragon riders are no match against our foe, then you are even more so. Though her words were harsh, there was no bite behind them as a curious look entered her emerald orbs. But I know you are not so foolish, you must have a plan. What is it? There was no reason to hide his plan, as simple and transparent it was, from his ally. But there wasn't much time. Already Barst, who had gotten over his surprise at the sudden retreat of his opponents, was beginning to menacingly charge towards them, his tower shield to the side and that damned mace held high. There was only a few seconds before they collided. Though his palms were sweaty with unease, Ajihad calmly uttered a single word. Naruto. But it was enough. Islanzadi's eyes grew large before a rare smile graced her lips. How cunning of you, Ajihad. If you were an elf, I would have made you one of my personal advisors. But for now, her smile faded away as the air about her seemed to cool several degrees. Stay back, all of you. Ajihad didn't bother trying to stop Islanzadi. When the queen of the elves gave you an order in that kind of tone, you simply didn't argue. After all, only she had the strength and power to enact his plan, while still having a decent chance at living. The others would only slow her down. So when some of her elven guard looked as if they wanted to argue, Islanzadi shot them a frigid glare, her royal aura pressuring them into silence. She would be damned before letting another one of her elves die to that man. And they would be wise not to break it. Seeing how grim their queen became, the surrounding elves choked back their words and accepted her order, no matter how displeased they were. Retreating, they fanned out, killing any enemy soldier who resisted while making sure none would disturb Islanzadi. They needn't bothered. Other than a small pack of screaming halberd-wielding soldiers, who were quickly dispatched with extreme prejudice, nobody else dared to step up. It didn't matter if they be elf, human, dwarf, were-cat, Urgal or belonged to the Varden or the Empire, all were enraptured by the fight between a mortal human general, slayer of 200 elves, and the legendary elven queen of the past 500 years. A ring around the two combatants formed. The air was soon filled with the thundering of hooves on bare stone as Queen Islanzadi grabbed a spear from one of her protectors before urging her white mare forward in a furious gallop while her opponent howled out his challenge, unafraid and unbroken. With a screech Blagden, the white raven, flew off Islanzadi's shoulder and alighted on a nearby roof. 300 feet quickly diminished to 200 feet. Then 100. At 50 feet, Islanzadi narrowed her eyes as she reached out with her mind, her formidable reserves seeking to crush either the general's mind or regrettably the Eldenari's. Although only an elf, and not a rider at that, seizing control of one or two heart of hearts was not outside of her capabilities, especially for one of her age and power. But as her delicate nose stung from the wretched stench of iron and rust and her mouth twisted in disgust upon almost tasting the metallic tang of her brethren's blood, wafting from the bloody general on her tongue, the elf queen frowned when she felt absolutely nothing from her opponent. How could this be? Though her messengers had already informed her of the general's mental absence, Islanzadi couldn't help but stare at Barst in concealed shock as one of the fundamental truths in Allegezia was shattered before her eyes. What spell or ward could so completely hide him from my senses? Could it be? Far more knowledgeable than most human spellcasters put together could ever hope to be, a terrifying thought stole its way through her mind. However, any further thoughts were shelved away when Barst abruptly stood on his stirrups, his heavily armored form towering over her and his spiked mace raised high up in the air as muddy brown eyes glared down with utter contempt for the queen. There was little doubt what his intentions were. He was going to bash out her brains just like all the others, elf queen or not. Impudent. A cold light flared within the depths of Islanzadi's deep-set eyes as she leveled her borrowed weapon straight at the disguised Eldenari, its point a gleaming flicker in the smoke-ridden air. Pride and arrogance as both a member and ruler of the elves has always been Islanzadi's Achilles' heel. It was what drove her daughter off for the better part of a century, and more recently, almost led to the destruction of the last and best hope against the Empire. And now, despite her icy exterior, Islanzadi's thinly suppressed rage finally ignited upon seeing the murderer of hundreds of elves' complete disregard for her station as ruler of the elder race. Sneering at the pathetically obvious attempt, Barst contemptuously shifted his shield to the front, its blackened steel surface forming an impenetrable barrier between the head of the lance and the precious cargo hidden beneath. Fool, to lose control of your emotions after such a simple ruse, how low the elves have fallen. To think the fabled queen of elves was so gullible. A bloodthirsty grin surfaced on his craggy face. How disappointing. With the queen enraged, her guard was at a minimum. As the distance between the two quickly vanished, a pleasurable stirring thrummed through Barst's loins as he anticipated Islanzadi's haughty expression morphing into one of horror and regret right before he cracked her pretty head open and spilled her brains out for all the world to see. Die! Bursting out with a speed far greater than before, the general grinned when he saw her pupils constrict in shock as his deadly weapon unexpectedly blurred away from sight. The plates of his armor groaned in protest as they struggled to contain his bulging muscles. In the time it takes for a spark to fly off a piece of flint, the spiked head of the mace reappeared right above her head, one of its flanges barely an inch or two from sending the queen to her eternal sleep. However, just when victory seemed to be within his grasp, a hint of clarity broke through Islanzadi's untimely wrath, her once cloudy eyes now clear. In the span of less than a millisecond, she realized how foolish she had been, to be provoked at such an inopportune moment. And knowing there was not much she could do to retaliate in that instant, she took a gamble. Either she would level the playing field, or be at a complete disadvantage against man and horse. Loosening her grip on her mare, Islanzadi, in an amazing display of dexterity, rolled so far to the right she almost slipped off her steed, hanging on only by her strong legs and arm wrapped around its belly and neck. Hidden from Barst's view, she closed her eyes, a single thought in her mind, before thrusting her spear towards the gap between the hind legs of Barst's stallion. Forgive me. Stunned by the completely unexpected and unconventional maneuver, Barst missed his strike. Instead of landing on the head of his opponent, the giant mace head crashed down on the back of Islanzadi's mount, mere inches away from her leg. Crack! A horrifying snap and crackle shattered the air as the spine and ribs of the queen's white mare fractured into 100 pieces, its internal organs spilling out into the cobbled stone as its saddle and hide did nothing to stop the spiked head from smashing it in half. Knowing she would be next if she stayed, Islanzadi elegantly leapt off her fallen steed and rolled back onto her feet, sword drawn and ready for the next bout. A hushed moan of despair emerged from the Varden when they saw their mightiest fighter be thrown to the ground while roars of approval came from the Empire's side. However, all went silent when a startled shout and metallic clang echoed through the crowd. A satisfied smirk marked Islanzadi's lips when she heard her gamble come through. Though she had lost her mount, she made sure to leave a nasty surprise for the general. Opposite of her, Barst slowly picked himself off the ground, a slight hitch in his stride, as if he had once injured his left knee or hip. But otherwise, he was completely unharmed with not even a single dent on his armor. However, several feet away, his charger mournfully neighed in pain, one of its hind legs twisted at an awkward angle and the remains of a spear embedded in the stone. It's as I thought then. Though Barst and his horse are immune to direct physical and magical attacks, it would seem such protection ends there. Most wards only worked on either magical or external threats and were comparatively weaker towards physical internal ones, or rather, those caused by the user himself. The only way she knew around this weakness was the use of complicated spells that bolstered physique. However, such spells had a high chance of negatively impacting the more delicate operations of the body, such as blood flow and increased oxygen uptake needed to sustain higher-level activity. So when she saw Barst's mount galloping at a normal pace, rather than seeking to directly cripple Barst's mount, Islanzadi chose instead to simply tangle and trip it, letting momentum and gravity do the work. Ironically, her ploy only had a 50% chance of working, but when Barst's unusually powerful overhand strike unbalanced the horse, the poor beast's fate was all but sealed. Staring at his fallen mount, Barst tightly clenched the straps of his shield with his left and the polished handle of his spiked mace with his right before turning his livid gaze towards the elf queen. Enraged and humiliated how easily he had been played with, he growled, "You'll pay for that." Snorting in disdain, Islanzadi didn't bother to exchange words and merely lifted her sword up with two hands into a high guard, its point a shining beacon in the midst of a battlefield of smoke and death. There would be no more words. Only blood and death. Apparently, Barst got the silent message as he lowered his center of gravity, shield in front. After having the tables turned on him so abruptly, his previous arrogant demeanor faded to one of cunning and wariness. No longer would he underestimate the elf in front of him simply because of what he carried. Glancing to the side, a crafty glint entered his eyes. In a blur of speed, the general dropped his shield with a loud clatter before grabbing the neck of his downed steed and, with his left arm alone, heaved it towards Islanzadi. Wary of her spell going awry, the elf queen did not try and stop the still-breathing animal, instead choosing to pivot to the right and allow the horse to fly by. Doing so left her vision obscured for but a second, but it was enough for Barst. Scooping up his shield from the ground, the general left cracked stones in his wake as he raced across the short distance between him and Islanzadi, shield held in front. Once he was but a few feet away, he lifted his mace and struck down at the queen, hoping to take advantage of the tiny gap in her defenses. It was not to be. Despite the sound of clashing steel and a roaring dragon in the distance, Islanzadi's ears remained sharp and heard the general approaching as well as the air being buffeted by the mace. Taking a half step back, she slashed down at the mace, avoiding its spiked head while batting the weapon aside, before stepping in and cutting towards the leather straps that held his shield to his arm in a single motion, careful to not touch the man himself and trigger the wards. In an inhumane display of skill and control, Islanzadi's effort was rewarded with the harsh clank of a heavy piece of metal as Barst's hulking shield fell off his arm. However, other than an enraged gleam in his eye, the general showed no signs of anger other than to kick the now useless shield towards the queen. The seemingly offhand action turned into a terrifying one considering Barst's unnatural strength. Once again shifting to the side, Islanzadi dodged past the whirling shield, but not before briefly tapping its side to redirect it towards one of the buildings. Had she not, the flying hunk of metal would have shorn through several ranks of soldiers behind her. Gripping his mace with both hands, Barst roared as he unleashed a flurry of strikes, hoping to crush Islanzadi like he had done with the other elves before her. With his uncanny speed and strength combined with the lack of wards, none were able to last longer than a blow or two from his spiked mace. Even elves, for all their naturally enhanced strength and speed, were unable to withstand a single hit before crumpling to the ground like any man, dwarf, or Urgle. But Islanzadi wasn't just any elf. Not backing down another step, the queen of the elves met each strike with one of her own, her wrist a mere blur as she deftly parried away all of Barst's smashes and jabs with deceptive ease. She was poetry in motion as she danced around the heavily armored man. She was simply too fast, too skilled, for the general to catch, and her strength, even if slightly weaker, allowed her to deal with his blows with little difficulty. Crack! A small hole formed after she knocked one of the general's thrusts crashing into the cobblestone as she lashed out, and stabbed towards the small opening in his helmet. However, Barst relied on his wards and ignored the stab in favor of retaliating with a counterstroke of his own, recovering almost instantaneously from Islanzadi's parry. Forced to abandon her offense unless she wanted to be turned into a hamburger, Islanzadi swiftly withdrew, her sword a shining streak of steel as she intercepted the spiked head. Above, a stark white raven circled the two, cawing and shrieking in the harsh manner of its kind. Minutes passed as the two continued to trade blows up and down the street, used the entire street as their arena, the fleshy walls of either side proving less of an obstacle than a pebble on the side of the road. Once or twice, soldiers of both Empire and Varden attempted to intervene, only to be cut or bludgeoned to death within a few seconds of joining. Even the elf bodyguards of Islanzadi no longer dared to draw near to the dueling duo after one of their own fell to a casual jab of his mace. All they could do was join the rest of the soldiers and watch in helpless awe as their queen weaved in between his strikes and attacked when she could in order to shave away at the Eldenari's energy. All those within the vicinity, their allegiance irrelevant, simply stared, weapons forgotten by their side, unable to tear their eyes from the fight of the century. Holes and cracked stone littered the two's surroundings, the consequence of Islanzadi constantly redirecting most the general's mace to the ground. Hacking down after deflecting yet another one of the man's ridiculously strong swings, she frowned when her sword once again stopped after colliding with his wards. This cannot go on. Despite her cool demeanor, Islanzadi felt frustration mounting within her as she narrowly ducked yet another blow from Barst. She had already lost count of how many strikes she landed on the human general, each capable of bisecting men in full plate armor, only for her sword to be stopped by his unwavering wards. In fact, the only times he showed even a hint of concern was when she aimed towards the large bulge underneath his breastplate. Since then, the general grew far more wary towards any further attacks directed at the source of his power. It was because of this that other than a small limp which she wasn't even responsible for, Barst showed no sign of tiring, let alone injury. If anything, he was slowly growing stronger as he grew more used to pulling energy from the Eldenari. Her on the other hand. Clang! Parrying away yet another swing, Islanzadi let out a muffled groan as her bones creaked in protest while perspiration trickled down her back. Though she hadn't taken a direct or even glancing hit, just the sheer force transmitted through her blade after blocking blow after blow was enough to steadily wear her down. This was not even taking into account that unlike Barst, she couldn't afford to make even the slightest mistake, for her wards would not protect her. The concentration alone to ensure this was as, if not more, exhausting than warding the spiked head of the mace that sought to bash her into oblivion. Had it not been for her elves lending their energy, she doubted she could have lasted as long as she did. But, as the fight went on and she had to continually replenish her stamina, she could feel even that support begin to wane. In the end, not even 10 of the most powerful of elves are able to rival a single mature Eldenari. The elf queen dejectedly mused, muscles trembling in protest of her actions. And though she hated to admit it, especially towards some human who wasn't even a rider, victory is impossible. As of now, it's only a matter of time before I make a mistake, or he realizes there is nothing I can do against him. Unless I use magic. Almost as soon the idea formed, it was instantly rejected as Islanzadi remembered the extreme risks of using the ancient language. Not only could she harm her allies or even herself, but she knew Galbatorix no doubt warded Barst against most conventional forms of arcane attacks, leaving only a few obscure backdoors to make sure the general firmly remained under his control. The only other option she had would be to order her elves to all swarm him until even the Eldenari cracked under pressure from warding off too many attacks. However, the mere thought of sending so many of her race, a race that only conceived an average of 1 or 2 children every century, to die was so reprehensible to the extreme she would rather see herself explode from an awry spell before giving the order. Not to mention her pride would never allow her to trade so many elf lives for a single human's unless it was for someone like Galbatorix. So if I can't use magic or might of arms. Dancing away from a sudden shoulder tackle, a single thought echoed in Islanzadi's mind as a small puff of white escaped her lips. Naruto, where in the riders are you? Well away from the destructive pair, Ajihad watched the two hack at each other, their movements almost too fast to follow. No, hack was the wrong word, at least when it came to Islanzadi. To use such a banal term to describe the elf queen would be an insult. Her movements were glorious, her swordplay powerful yet lithe, footwork perfect despite the numerous small stones and holes now scattered about the street. On the other hand, Barst was the definition of crude, his swings were wide and unrefined, his large frame covered from head to toe in bulky metal. But nevertheless, he was deadly with his abnormal speed. Had it not been for the Eldenari fueling his seemingly impenetrable wards, strength, speed, and stamina, he had no doubt the general would have long been slain by Islanzadi in the first exchange. But he does. Frowning, Ajihad nervously thumbed the pommel of his sword as he scanned the surrounding enemies before directing his full attention to the most important duel, outside killing Galbatorix and Shuriken. He wouldn't put it past Barst or one of his subordinates to suddenly order a charge and take the Varden unawares. It's what he would do and strategically the best option, striking when the enemy least expects it. But considering the strongest allies of the Varden, the elves, not only didn't strictly obey him, but solely listened to their queen who was currently locked in combat, giving such an order was a pipe dream at best. Instead, he turned to his right-hand man while gesturing towards a narrow street several feet away. Jormungandr, take a contingent down that street and surround Barst and his men. Sir. As always, Jormungandr immediately listened to Ajihad and ordered his squad towards the narrow street. But as he was about to disappear, he turned towards the man he respected the most. Ajihad, good luck. Saluting, he joined the rest of his men and soon faded from sight. Staring at the space his loyal second-in-command once occupied, Ajihad murmured, "You too, old friend," before returning his gaze to General Barst and Islanzadi. Unlike most of the Varden, he knew Islanzadi couldn't defeat the general, at least not without a certain blonde's help. Straining his eyes, he noticed Islanzadi's hands slightly tremble after blocking one of Barst's smashes. He knew the queen wouldn't be able to hold on for much longer. Shivering, the leader of the Varden didn't notice as tiny tendrils of frost started to crawl up the back of his greaves, mistaking it as his nerves simply getting the best of him. Still, a nugget of suspicion lodged itself in the back of his mind. He wasn't one for losing his composure even in the direst of situations. However, that thought went out the window when he felt his heart almost leap out of his chest upon seeing the Queen of the Elves catch her ankle on a tiny crack in the street. It was a small thing, barely an inch deep, but it was enough to cause the legendary queen to stumble back. For but a split second, a hole opened in her previously perfect form. A split second too long. Ajihad's dark eyes widened in horror as he watched Barst's orbs behind his helm light up in unrestrained glee. Reaching out, the general grabbed hold of Islanzadi's sword, unconcerned of its razor edge, and held it tight. In the beginning, Barst had attempted to catch the queen's blade and swiftly end the fight, only to quickly give up when the sword proved too elusive, too swift for even him. But now, tightly clenching the slender blade between his gauntlet fingers, Barst wrenched it aside, ignoring several arrows flying towards him before they erupted into sickly orange puffs of smoke, his words rendering such desperate measures useless. Glancing at the elves, he grinned when he saw the despair in their eyes before turning his gaze back towards the downed queen. "Now you die." Lifting his mace high for the killing blow, he sneered in contempt at the defiant look in Islanzadi's emerald eyes, only to furrow his brows in confusion when he saw the corners of the queen's ruby lips quirk up into a complacent smirk. It was irritating. Why was she smiling? He was the one with the upper hand. Her was trapped, and her magic useless. She should be furious, cursing at him to go to whatever hell she and the rest of her infernal kind believed in. So why are you smiling? Some baser instinct made Barst roar at the downed queen, his spit splattering all over the ground and her face. He had to know. This was supposed to be his crowning achievement, his mark on history. She should be begging him for mercy. But Islanzadi didn't answer. Even as her nose twitched in disgust at the man's spittle on her royal body, even when she saw the blood-stained spikes of the mace begin to descend, she continued to smile, for she knew. This was her victory. When he didn't hear an answer, Barst howled and smashed his mace towards Islanzadi's pretty head with his full strength. "It doesn't matter. Once you're dead, I'll parade your corpse throughout your Ubane before letting your crow eat your own entrails. We'll see how you smile then." A dark shadow descended upon the elf queen. Off on his horse, as if in slow motion, Ajihad helplessly watched the spiked head smash down towards Islanzadi's head. Should such a blow land, only pulped flesh and shattered bone would be left of the queen's lovely visage. A pounding pulse in his ears deafened him to the groans of despair of his men and the wild cheers of the Empire at the coming end to the duel. Yet he still held hope that the only one who could turn this around would show up, only for it to diminish the further the mace descended. 6 feet, 5 feet, 4, come on, where are you? 3, 2, too late, it's too late, 1. Closing his eyes, blood dripped from the corner of his mouth as Ajihad mentally screamed, "Damn it Naruto, where the fuck are you?" When a spike was but an inch away, as if answering his mental cries, a dark blur lined with silver and invisible to all in the street, darted out from a rooftop and interposed itself between Islanzadi and the deadly piece of steel. Smack! A hush fell over the crowd when they saw something stop the unstoppable mace. Squinting their eyes to see what could have possible stopped something even the Elf Queen couldn't, they gasped, eyes almost bulging out of their heads. It was unbelievable, impossible even. Some rubbed their eyes, others bit the tips of the tongues, only to see nothing changed. That what just happened in front of them, happened. Then it came a cheer. Then another one, and another, until the air rumbled and the ground trembled under the weight of the Varden's excited roars of relief. On the other hand, Barst, who had been expecting the satisfying crunch of metal on bone and the juicy splash of gore, silently stared in disbelief at what stopped him. It was a man with a shaggy silver mane, pale skin, 3 red marks on his face. Foreign blue armor protected his shoulders, upper body, and groin. More strangely, odd black metal nubs stuck out all over his body. But they didn't matter. What mattered was the damn fact this stranger managed to stop his mace. With his bare hands. No, make that hand. Somehow, this thing, managed to stop his all-out strike with a single hand. And all without a single scratch or any visible difficulty. Impossible. What are you? I order you to identify yourself. A chill ran down the general's spine when the stranger lifted his head up, revealing a pair of dead ringed eyes staring straight at him. Suddenly, the sky and earth reversed as an immutable force pulled on his mace and smashed him into the crack-riddled ground. Before he could blink in surprise, a foot slammed into his neck and cracked the street underneath. Immediately, multicolored light flashed as the wards and spells fueled by the Eldenari fought against the pressure. But when nothing happened, a taunting laugh erupted out of Barst's throat. Ha, do you see that? I admit your strength is impressive, to be able to stop me, but even you are helpless before the might of the dragons. All you can do is wait for me to kill you. Ha 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 ha. Is that so? Lifting his foot, the newcomer stomped down again and this time, began to squeeze. Once again, a kaleidoscope of colors flared to life as the earth groaned in protest. Still, nothing seemed to happen, and Barst again let out another hoarse laugh. Fool, did you not hear what I said? It doesn't matter what, wait, what is that? Crack. What started out as a small crack began to spiderweb across the barrier of light until eventually it covered its entire surface. Suddenly, the once impenetrable shield looked fragile, as if it could shatter with but a gentle breeze. Stop. I order you to stop. Stop. Eyeing the collapsing spells in horror, Barst howled in desperation before trying to free his mace, only to find it unyielding, as if it were a mountain he were trying to move and not an oversized piece of metal and wood. When he saw how useless it was to continue, he instead lashed out with his free hand, punching the leg that held him captive. It was useless. With a final squeeze, the magical shield shattered into 1,000 pieces and a ghostly howl shrieked out as the Eldenari went into sudden hibernation, its energy stores finally depleted. Without the Eldenari feeding his body, the general groaned as he felt his strength leave him. No longer was he the invincible man who killed hundreds of elves. Now, he was just a man past his prime who couldn't even lift his own weapon as his arms flopped weakly to the ground. With a trembling voice, he whispered, "What are you, monster?" Leaning down, the Rinnegan coldly peered deep into Barst's eyes before its owner's pale lips cracked open. I am Naruto. That's it for part 13. Thank you for watching and see you in the next video.